Hello there, my name is Captain Jeff. I'm a line pilot for a major U.S. legacy carrier, and I do this little show called the Airline Pilot Guy Show. And in it, I review news in the previous week or so and kind of give you my view, my perspective on it. And I also answer a lot of your questions, a lot of your feedback. And that's what the show is about. So if you're a first-timer, sit back and relax. Make sure you get yourself a nice cold beverage, adult beverage or whatever, or perhaps a cup of coffee, and enjoy the show. It's going to be a long one, at least 2 hours, so hope you don't have anything to do in the next, I don't know, couple of hours. Again, this is an audio podcast. This is the behind-the-scenes recording of the audio podcast. So let's get started, shall we? Airline Pilot Guy, episode 129.
Flight 209er, you are cleared for takeoff.
Roger.
LA departing 123.9er.
Roger. Request connected.
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the view from my side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from Studio 1A in the APG headquarters building in Roswell, Georgia. Let's see, in today's episode, we're going to talk about a company called AirPooler. It's kind of doing for airplanes what carpooling is doing. Well, at least they're trying. Talk about Oshkosh, the EAA AirVenture. Got a live report on scene from one of our listeners. And, well, so much more. So sit back and relax. Get all settled in. Tray tables and seatbacks in their upright and locked positions. Electronic devices powered on. Flight 129 is ready for pushback. Well, hello. Hope everybody is doing well. And you may notice that I'm here again in my home studio, which is really not a studio. It's just a desk in a corner of my basement. It's kind of a print shop and a man cave, and it's just a mess, actually, if you ask my wife. But I'm at home because I just finished a 4-day trip and left on Monday morning early and finally arrived home yesterday afternoon. In the middle of the trip, had a domicile layover, had a reroute, actually, the second day of the trip. Well, let me first back up. The first day of the trip went from Atlanta to Minneapolis, Minneapolis to San Jose, California, and I had a great meetup event out there in Northern California, the Bay Area. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the next day, leaving San Jose for Minneapolis, we were supposed to sit around for a few hours, then head to Washington, D.C. for a D.C. layover. We received a message en route that the company needed us to fly from Minneapolis to Tampa almost immediately after we arrived, and that we would be laying over in Tampa. And then the next day, we would fly from Tampa to Detroit, deadhead from Detroit back to Atlanta, and then we would have a domicile layover, arriving in Atlanta in the afternoon. And then, of course, we would pick up the balance of the trip on Thursday, the last day of the trip, which basically was comprised of just a turnaround from Atlanta to LaGuardia and then back. So that's what we did. We headed down to Tampa, Florida. I'm thinking, okay, this might impact the way that I record my show. For those of you who have listened to the show in the past, you know that I try to record the show in my mobile studio, while I'm in my hotel room on my layover. Now, my last show, I did a Airline Pilot Guy extra show to kind of catch up on feedback. And so I think it was last Friday? I was doing the same thing, recording. No, I think it was Sunday. Well, I don't know. It was one of those days last week that I recorded the Airline Pilot Guy extra show to try to kind of catch up on some of the feedback. And I was, again, here in my home studio. So Let me see. I'm getting lost. Oh, we arrived in Tampa, and then I received another reroute message that said basically the captain who was supposed to fly the really early morning flight, the early morning departure out of Tampa to Atlanta, which is like a 5:25 departure in the morning. Yikes. Had some kind of a, I don't know if he was sick or had some kind of a family emergency or whatever, but whatever it was, he could not fly that first flight in the morning, and they wanted me to do that instead. And so I thought, okay. So the next day, Wednesday, I flew from Tampa to Atlanta, got in, I don't know, before 7 o'clock, and then I was basically off the rest of the day and went back out yesterday, Thursday, to do the LaGuardia turn. Met back up with my original co-pilot. He did something different, but anyway, we were reunited at the end of the trip on Thursday. Well, basically what I'm trying to say is that completely discombobulated everything for me as far as planning for the show and doing the recording and everything else yesterday at home. Or the day before yesterday, it was just too busy, too many things going on at home, things that I needed to do, errands to run, etc. So I held off on recording until today. So here we are. Okay, so my last layover on my trip last week, I was also in Tampa, and I visited with my friend Haig Martirosian, and we went to dinner at the Tampa Bay Brewing Company in Ybor City, and then I received a custom tour of Sykes Chapel on the campus of the University of Tampa. By the way, Haig is, in addition to being a world-class organist, he is also a composer, a conductor, and he happens to be the dean of the College of Arts and Letters at the University of Tampa. A very smart man and a very talented man. And so afterwards he said, hey, if you have a little time to head over here to the Sykes Chapel, I'll show you this beautiful organ. And I thought, yeah, let's do it. So we went over there, and I'll try to remember to put a picture of the organ in the show notes. But I pulled out the iPhone. Now I know it's not I didn't have my field recorder with me to do a stereo recording, but I did have my iPhone with me. And so I pulled that out, and I recorded a little snippet of Haig playing this beautiful Dobson organ in Sykes Chapel. So let's listen to a little bit of that. And then I went on talking about how wonderful, I mean, wasn't that beautiful? And that was my response, wow. And to be there right next to these beautiful pipes, and especially at the very end where he played that big, I don't know, 64-foot stop. I'm not sure exactly the details on it, but it's a huge pipe, and you can just feel the air rolling through it, and everything just shaking your body. It's just such a beautiful instrument. So thank you very much, Haig, for joining me and treating me for dinner at the Tampa Bay Brewing Company in Ybor City, and then giving me the custom tour of the Dobson organ at Sykes Chapel, University of Tampa. It was a thrill of a lifetime. So again, you should look up Haig Martirosian on the Googles, and you'll see that he has all kinds of recordings out there. He's just a very amazingly talented individual. So check it out. I'll try to remember to put some links in the show notes so you can check it out yourself. And then somewhere, I don't know if it was last trip or the beginning of this trip, I'm getting old. I can't remember a lot of things. What is that called? CRS? Can't remember stuff. But anyway, I was flying from somewhere to somewhere, and one of the flight attendants was jump seating, and as she was getting off the airplane, or maybe, yeah, I think she was getting off the airplane, deplaning, she said something about, "Hey, Captain Jeff," or "Are you Captain Jeff?" or something like that. And I said, "Uh-huh." And she said, "Hey, I just wanted to say hi." I guess maybe she recognized my voice on the airplane. I don't remember the circumstances right offhand. But anyway, her name is Anna Marie Showalter, and I said, "Well, how do you know about my show?" And she said, "Well, my boyfriend, who is a pilot, listens to the show, and he was talking about it and asked me if I ever ran into this dude, this captain named Captain Jeff." And so she said, "Now I can tell him I have," or something to that effect. So I just wanted to do a shout out to Anna Marie, and more importantly, Anna Marie's boyfriend who's listening to the show. So, hey. So, let's see, what else? On this trip, when I was going from Atlanta to Minneapolis and then San Jose, I had a meetup at the Taurinus, Taurinus, Brazilian Steakhouse, and this was arranged by listeners Jeff and Anissa Moeller. Jeff and Anissa and their friends. So he said, I basically did a few days before I went out to San Jose, I tried to find as many people as I could who live out in the Bay Area. Now, I know some of you listening right now are going, "Hey, I live out here. I didn't receive any notification from you." Well, here is something that would help. If you go to the website, airlinepilotguy.com, you can look over there on the right column. There is something about signing up for a newsletter. Don't worry, I just ask anybody that's on the newsletter. I never really send anything out. I mean, that may change in the future, but right now what I'm using it for is a way to collect a database for you who want to be included in a future meetup. And so what I have there is, you put your name there and your email address, and then you put your three-letter identifier airport where Acme flies. So, that's the place that I'm going to be flying into and have a possible layover and possible meetup. And so not your home airport like, Charlie Fox 5 or something like that. I mean something like SFO or SJC, or you get the picture. And then also put your city and your state. Okay, so that gives me a database to work with. So I went into my newsletter database and looked for people who live in the San Jose area. Now, I knew that Jeff and Anissa live out there because they've sent feedback in the past, and they said, "Hey, anytime you're out here again in San Francisco or Oakland or San Jose, holler at us, and we'll get together and have a meetup." So I found several people that way. I remembered that Fred Sampson lives in the Bay Area. He was at an earlier meetup in Orlando. I think it was earlier this year. So I was able to contact him. Again, I went through some of my email and searched for keywords like San Jose, SJC, SFO, San Francisco, etc., and trying to find people that live in the Bay Area. And I know that I probably missed a few of you, and I'm sorry for that. But again, if you want to be considered to receive a notification for a future meetup, especially these short notice things, and that's what I usually do, very short notice, go to the website, sign up for the newsletter, and put the three-letter identifier of the airport in which, like the major airport that you live near, that you would be willing to drive to, or whatever, to attend an Airline Pilot Guy community meetup. All right, so I did that, and ended up contacting quite a few people, and let me tell you, everybody who ended up showing up at the Brazilian Steakhouse in San Jose. Of course, Jeff and Anissa, they kind of arranged the location and the reservation there. And by the way, they treated for my portion of the fantastic meal there. And then they had a couple of their friends join us as well, Emmanuel, and Randy. And then Tim Van Ram, he sends feedback quite often. So Tim joined us. Andy Novotny as well. Jim Mercado. And Fred Sampson, I mentioned that he had attended an earlier meetup in Orlando. And I did bring my field recorder with me, but it was just so noisy in there that I really thought that you wouldn't be able to hear a thing, so I didn't record any audio. But we did. Tim actually was kind of our official photographer. He took a bunch of photos, so I'll put some of those photos in the show notes as well if you're interested in seeing, the fun and frivolity at the Taurus Brazilian Steakhouse in San Jose, California. Okay, so that was a blast. And by the way, thank you, Jeff and Anissa, for the wonderful custom-made T-shirt that has some references to that. Well, the very best movie ever made, of course, Airplane, the movie. So thanks. That's a great handcrafted T-shirt that I'll wear with pride. And I need to do another thing. I saw Tim out in front of the steakhouse as I was walking over from my hotel, and parked in front of it was Tim's car, and he walks out and flashes his lights and honks the horn, and walks out and says, "Captain Jeff?" And I said, "Yeah. Who are you? Because I don't know what you guys look like." And he said, "Tim Van Ram." And I said, "Oh, I need to thank you for sending me that wonderful prescription medicine coffee mug that you sent me because of my caffeine addiction and all that kind of stuff." And he goes, "Oh, that was my brother Mark, who lives on the East Coast." And I went, "Huh?" I guess didn't ever really pick up on the fact that, Mark, you are not the same guy as Tim, and that you guys are brothers, and that Mark is the one that sent me that great mug. So thank you, Mark. Sorry for attributing the credit to your brother Tim and not you. So I do appreciate the gift. That was very nice of you. Okay, and then finally, while I was going from gate Charlie 3 in Minneapolis over to gate G21 or something, I know it was like about as far as you could go from one part of the airport to the other, I was walking along the moving sidewalk, one of several, and all of a sudden I kind of felt the presence of somebody, and I think he tapped on my shoulder and said, "Are you Captain Jeff or Captain Jeff?" I went, "Yeah." And he said, "Hey, my name is John," I think John Stockwell. And he said, "Hey, I listened to your show," and he told me a little bit about that he was in the Air Force and that he just retired and that he's working for a regional, and he has an interview set up sometime, I think, either this month or next month with Acme. And he, after I got back from my trip, he sent me this audio feedback. So let's take a listen to John.
Hi, Captain Jeff. This is John. We met at Minneapolis, St. Paul on Monday, August 4th. I just wanted to say it was a real treat to meet you in person, no matter how briefly. I also wanted to thank you for doing the APG podcast. For the last year or so, I've been listening to your show during my 50-minute commute to and from work. During that time, it was wonderful to get to spend a couple hours a week immersed in commercial aviation. I also wanted to say that your podcast was one of the influences that helped me make the very difficult decision to retire from the Air Force and to go ahead and jump into the airline industry. I'm currently with a regional carrier, but as I mentioned when we spoke, I have an interview with Acme coming up soon, and I'm absolutely beyond excited about that opportunity. So anyway, thanks again, and with any luck, next time we meet, I'll be dressed just like you, minus a stripe. Until then, wishing you unlimited viz and tailwinds.
Well, thank you, John, for sending the audio feedback, and wow, sometimes I don't realize that, what kind of impact or effect or, I don't know, persuasion that I have over people like you, John, that listen to my show. And it really is humbling to me to hear that people have made major decisions, as you have, to retire from the Air Force and jump in both feet first into the airline industry. And I'm thrilled that you did, and I think that you did not make the wrong decision. I think you made the right decision, and I really, really hope that you do well with your interview with Acme, and I too hope that I'll get to share a cockpit with you, and we can have a grand time flying airplanes all around this great country and the world. So thanks again for sending the audio feedback and having the guts to go and tap on this old gray-haired big, bushy, gray mustached guy wearing a captain's hat and an Acme uniform and taking a gamble to see whether or not it was me. And in this case, it was a worthwhile one, I think. So I know that I appreciate meeting people like you out there in the real world. And again, it's humbling to hear so many people listening to the show and actually taking my advice for things. So, anyway, so mentioned on the last show. Oh, before I get to that, just a reminder that if you would like to kind of keep track of where I am, mostly while I'm on trips, but even while I'm home from trips and during the week, I try to remember to use my Foursquare Swarm app to sign in, and I set up a special Twitter account just for my location, where my sign-ins are, etc. And I've entitled it, Where is Captain Jeff? That's at Where is CAPTJEFF. Yeah! I'm sorry, I hope I didn't scare you guys.
Where in the world is
Captain Jeff? Wish I had a voice like that deep bass in rockapella. Rockapella.com. Check them out. They're a fantastic rock a cappella group. Okay. So I was saying that on an earlier episode I was talking about the EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association AirVenture 2014, the air show that is put on every year in Oshkosh, and most people just refer to it as Oshkosh. I know that that's the way I think of it, and I had mentioned that somebody had contacted me last year and said, hey, if you want to come out this year, the one that we just had, you know, check out the show. You're more than welcome to stay at my house and all that kind of stuff. And I mentioned that I can't remember who that was, and time just kind of got away from me, et cetera, et cetera. And guess what? Well, that gentleman sent me some audio feedback from the EAA AirVenture. So let's listen to what he has to say.
Good morning, Captain Jeff. This is Chad, the financial planner guy up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Wanted to give you some feedback on APG 128. I was downloading that this morning and just starting to listen to it here in the car on my way about 50 miles south down to EAA AirVenture in Oshkosh. It's the one day this convention that I'm able to make the show. Haven't been able to find time in my schedule to get there otherwise. Yes, that was me who extended the invitation to come and stay and take in the show with me. And that invitation remains open for subsequent years. Hopefully that works out in some way in your schedule. For those that haven't been to AirVenture before, it's been said that if it flies, it will probably be at Oshkosh. My experience has been that's certainly true. AirVenture has been referred to as the Woodstock of aviation, or call it the Mecca of aviation. It's something that anybody with any interest in aviation should put on their bucket list and try to make it here once. They've said in the news up here that approximately 500,000 people and 10,000 airplanes will come into or out of Oshkosh in the course of the week-long event here. A lot of volunteers help EA to put the show on. I can remember as a kid working down at EA, helping to park cars or working in the campground, raising money for scouting and things like that. So it's just really a fabulous event. Looking forward to the day down there today. I'll try to give you some commentary later on, live from somewhere in the event. Probably somewhere on what I call the West Ramp. Others may call Boeing Plaza or Aeroshell Square, where they usually display a lot of the bigger planes. Hoping to get a look at some of the warbirds today and spend a little bit of time in the home-built area, meeting up with some old friends from down there, and really just taking in all the different things that the convention has to offer. One of the new things this year is the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds are actually paying a visit to the AirVenture this year to put on a couple of performances. In the past, either the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds have visited EAA and have done basically nothing more than a flyby or perhaps a static display for a day. They were not permitted for whatever reason to do their regular shows, probably because the airport is located close to a residential area and they did not have a big enough show box for whatever reason. Well, that has fortunately changed. This is the first time that they're going to be doing a performance down here. My understanding is 2 shows along with a practice. Today will be a practice, but the word I've heard is the practices basically emulate a regular show, so we are really in for a treat down here. A little bit new for EAA in that because they're performing, they've had to make some adjustments to the crowd lines and the flight line to move things back a little bit and give the Thunderbirds a bigger show box. So there's been some adjustments down there from what I'm told, but really looking forward to going down there and just seeing everything that AirVenture has to offer. So for now, I'll sign off, but give you a little bit more later on, hopefully live from somewhere in the big mega AirVenture 2014. Thanks, Captain Jeff.
And here is that second audio file.
Hey, Captain Jeff, this is Chad, the financial planner guy, coming to you just slightly to the north and the east of what I now know as Boeing Plaza. I still call the West Ramp. Standing here by a Cirrus aircraft at what is Air Show Central, watching a couple of biplanes do some aerobatics. You know, literally at Oshkosh in the area of 1 mile flight line, you can go from a Curtiss Jenny to a C-17 Globemaster, to a bunch of home-built aircraft, a bunch of Rutan Long EZs, to the Warbird area. Really, if it flies, if it's flown, or if it's going to fly, it's here at Oshkosh. I think the neatest thing I've seen so far today has been it's an amphibious airplane that once you land on the water, there's a fishing seat that's bolted to the front of it, just outside ahead of the cockpit, and a hammock that actually hangs off the back of the cockpit and attaches to the tail. So I guess all in one, you've got an airplane that you can land, fish, and then take a nap if you wish. Huge crowd here today at AirVenture. The air shows just began. Looking forward to some more bird flying, and then ultimately ending up with the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds coming out. So a warm Wisconsin welcome to any of you who might visit here or are visiting AirVenture. And Captain Jeff, I hope you can come north and visit here soon. You'd have a great time. So live from AirVenture Oshkosh 2014, this is Chad, the financial planner guy. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds to you, Jeff. Thanks.
Fantastic. I love hearing all that background, the airplanes flying in the background, and it really gave us a sense of what it's like to be right there on location in Oshkosh, Wisconsin at the AirVenture 2014. So I look forward to possibly taking you up on the offer, Chad, the financial planner guy. And again, thank you for taking the time to send in those recordings. That was cool. Okay, before we move on to some more news, let's do this, which some consider is the best part of the show.
Johnny, how much more coffee?
No thanks.
I love coffee, I love tea, I love the Java jive and it loves me. Coffee and tea and the Java and me. A cup, a cup, a cup, a cup, a cup. Yes, the Coffee Fund. AirlinePilotGuy.com/coffee. Since the last episode, we have a bunch of you. Wow, I'm so blessed. Philip, John, James, Bruno, Tony, Vicky, Patrick, James, Jeff, and Mitchell. And those were the ones that are using the classic method, the PayPal donation. And also on the patreon.com/airlinepilotguy page, my new patrons, Michael and Maximilian. We'll hear from Max sometime later in the show in the feedback section. So if you're wondering about what the Airline Pilot Guy Coffee Fund is all about, it basically helps me offset the costs of doing the show and also provides me with a nice steady stream of that wonderful, hot, tasty, satisfying caffeine delivery system that we all call coffee. You know, and speaking of that, I'm going to, that's the Ink Spots, by the way, recorded in 1940 which I believe is public domain, even though people always claim rights to that thing. Anyway, that was recorded in 1940 by the Ink Spots, called Java Jive. And speaking of Java Jive, here, let me see if I can find it. I didn't set this up. Somewhere in my notebook for feedback, we have somebody helping me sing the Java Jive. Where are you? I know you're here somewhere. Oh my goodness, we have a lot of feedback here. I'm vamping. Why can't I find you? I sound like the guy that Will Ferrell and Elf singing. Oh my. Here we go. This was sent in by Janelle in St. Louis. Yeah, St. Louis, Missouri. And she says she's currently on episode 102 and am gaining ground and actually catching up to your most current podcasts. Anyway, and she sent me this little iPhone video or smartphone video of her 4-year-old son, Sam, who thinks you are flying in big airplanes. Or he thinks that flying in big airplanes is very cool. And she says, I tend to agree. And he wants to sing you a song. So here we go. This is Sam.
I love coffee. I love tea. I love a Java Jive and it loves me. Coffee and tea and the Java and me. A cup, a cup, a cup, a cup, a cup.
Good job, buddy.
You're hired, Sam. And now we just need to put some music to that. So thank you, Janelle, for sending that in. That really made my day. So that was very, very cute. Sam, if you're listening, I think you have a great voice, and maybe you can fly big airplanes someday too. Okay? All righty. And tell your mom to keep her eyes on the road. All right. Where were we? Okay. So again, thank you everyone for your contributions to the Coffee Fund. Again, Philip, John, James, Bruno, Tony, Vicky, Patrick, James, Jeff, Mitchell, Michael, and Max. I couldn't do the show without you. All right. A lot of the news that I talk about on the show, I gather from this fantastic website managed by, produced by, hosted by Simon Herdecki. I'm not sure if that's the right way to pronounce his name or not. He is an Austrian, and he has this great website called the Aviation Herald. That's avherald.com, avherald.com. And just recently, he had somebody create, and he just released and put it up for download on iTunes for your iOS device, your smartphone, your iPhone, or your iPad. And if you want to support the Aviation Herald, now it's not cheap, it's not free, and it's not just a couple bucks, it's like $12.99. But you know what? I thought I need to buy this because I've been using Simon's hard work as a resource for this show for so long that it's about time that I gave him a little something in return. I probably owe him more than just buying his app, but it's a wonderful app. It's just like going to the website, except better, and it's available to you on your smartphone, your iPhone and your iPad. So check it out. I'll have a link in the show notes to the Aviation Herald app, available on the iTunes or iOS App Store. Excuse me. And so let's move on, shall we? AirPooler puts ride-sharing system on hold while clarifying an FAA standpoint. Okay, so AirPooler, what is this? Well, this is a new service that was just created in April of this year, I believe. And let me scroll down to get the page where they kind of explain it. AirPooler pairs pilots and passengers. This is from their website. AirPooler pairs pilots and passengers who share common destinations. If you've flown in a private plane before, you know how fun and convenient it can be. If you haven't, get introduced to a whole new world of leisure travel experience. Take off today. And then it has a section for those who might be interested in being the pilot of the private airplane, and then another section for those who are passengers. And it says, pilots in command, a few things you should know. Air Pooler is designed and intended to facilitate ride sharing under a common purpose cost sharing scenario as permitted by federal aviation regulations. Common purpose means that the destination is determined by you, the pilot in command, not the passengers. You and passengers have a bona fide reason to make the flight, and your purpose of making the flight is not merely to transport the passengers to the destination. If you were to list flights simply to take passengers, we believe you would likely be in violation of FAR Section 61.113A. Federal regulations set strict limitations on cost sharing. As a pilot, you may not pay less than the pro rata share of the operating expenses of a flight with passengers, provided the expenses involve only fuel, oil, airport expenditures, or rental fees. Air Pooler's estimates of a passenger's pro rata shares reflect permitted expenses. If you were to collect additional payments or compensation of any kind from passengers, we believe you would likely be in violation of 61.113C. So, let's see. They continue. All destination information, departure times, and the like are displayed on this website are intended as a convenience for users and are solely at the discretion of the pilot in command of any flight. Okay, so the reason why we're talking about this is that I guess there was some question about the legality of doing this. Now, a lot of you know that if you were to carry passengers for a fee, provide a service, flying passengers around, you would be required to have or hold a commercial pilot certificate. And the founders of this service are saying, well, what about all those private pilots out there who are not commercial pilot certificate holders, who want to offset some of the costs, just like as you would if you were, doing carpooling, going to work, right? You're not a company that provides service hauling people around from here to there. You're going to work yourself, and you're thinking, hey, why not invite some other people that go from point A to point B, the opportunity to ride with me, and then we can split the costs. And that's essentially what this whole thing is about. Well, in a message to members on July 2nd, Air Pooler co-founder and CEO Steve Lewis said that the enterprise has received a lot of interest since its launch in April. At the same time, some have raised questions as to whether private pilots who list on Air Pooler system might be holding out in violation of FAA regulations. Several of you who are interested in using the service have contacted us to ask for clarification on this topic. And some of you have told us you intend to remain on the sidelines pending a clear resolution. So this term, holding out, I've never heard of it myself, let's see, is a term used by the FAA. It's a regulatory framework that allows pilots to ask passengers to share expenses, again, 61.113C, and also the FAA's guidance on the elusive term holding out. The request was directed to, so anyway, they're trying to, oh, here we go. I'm sorry. Holding out is the term that addresses offering to transport people or cargo for a fee. And most private pilots understand it is not something that they are allowed to do. The CEO, Steve Lewis, told the Aviation International News Online that the legal interpretation that Air Pooler is seeking is to show the FAA that the service has nothing to do with holding out. The single most important and also vexed issue is the one around holding out, he said. It appears in quite a few places in statutes and opinion and documents, but connecting the dots is hard even for a trained lawyer. And so again, he goes on to explain the synopsis of our core claim is, we believe there is no limitation on holding out as long as the pilot is not receiving compensation. The FAA has said that certain types of operations by Air Pooler are not compensation, and we don't believe holding out is triggered. So anyway, the article goes on to talk about, their legal team is trying to provide or get some clarification from the FAA so that they can move forward. Apparently, a lot of people want to participate in this air pooling concept, but they're, rightfully concerned that they may be doing something that is illegal and could have their certificates taken from them, and they don't want that. So anyway, we'll keep our eye on this story to see if the FAA finally says, hey, what you're doing is okay, as long as the pilots don't, say, hey, where do you want to go? I'll take you for this amount of, as long as you, Joe Pilot, are going somewhere anyway and letting people know online that, hey, I'm going, if you're interested in cutting or sharing the expenses. I think that's a pretty cool idea. So, okay, but getting back to, I should have done this right after the Oshkosh feedback from Chad. This is an interesting story, I thought, and it's an article about the 1 week wonder, and the article is about the first flight. And over the 7 days of EAA AirVenture, this is from avweb.com, more than 2,500 volunteers pitched in to build an airplane, and on Tuesday morning they got their reward, the Zenith CH-750 Cruiser, November 140 Whiskey Whiskey, 1 week wonder. I love that. Whiskey Whiskey for week wonder. Took off on its first flight. The flight was great, said Jeff Skiles, EAA's VP for Community, who took the controls for the first circuit around the pattern. The Zenith Cruiser has a lot of performance and lifts off very fast, like a rocket ship, really. It was Skiles' first maiden flight of a new aircraft, EAA said. He was thoroughly checked out on Monday in another cruiser, as well as a 750 STOL. The airplane had taxied before the airship crowds on Sunday, the last official day of the show. It was built in a week, and it's a basic airplane, said Sebastian Heinz, president of Zenith, but it also has a state-of-the-art engine, a Rotax 912IS, and a touch-screen Dynon panel. Looks like a pretty slick airplane. Pretty cool. And if you want to learn more about the 1 week wonder, I'll have a link to this article in the show notes, as well as a YouTube video of the first flight of the Zenith CH-750 Cruiser, also known as 1 week wonder. All right. Cirrus. You've heard of that great airplane? It's a very popular airplane, and they make the SR-20 and SR-22, I believe, and probably some more that I'm not familiar with. If for those of you who are listening for the first time, I'm not a general. Well, I do have a single-engine commercial certificate, an instrument rating, commercial, multi-engine, all that kind of stuff. Not a private pilot certificate, by the way, interestingly enough. I've never held a private pilot certificate because when I was in the Air Force, we took a equivalency exam, FAA equivalency exam, and that gave us the commercial, multi-engine, IFR, our instrument rating, and limited to centerline thrust. And so when I got my single-engine land endorsement, or whatever that's called, I know that many of you are listening and saying, no, that's not the right term. Captain Jeff, what's wrong with you? Don't send me email, really. Don't send me feedback on that. It's not important. But anyway, for me to get checked out on a Cessna 152 out in California so I could go up and take my parents on a ride, I needed to get a single-engine land rating or endorsement or whatever it is. And I went to the local airport while I was in the Air Force with a friend of mine and a fellow T-37 instructor pilot who was also a CFII. Did a little bit of flying in the Cessna 150, 172, etc. Flew down to Jackson, Mississippi for the check ride, and that basically gave me my single engine capability so that I could rent an airplane. And but I never, and the reason for that, he said, well, the check ride for the commercial is actually for your situation is easier and faster than doing a private pilot certificate, because I believe that requires a cross-country segment and some other stuff. And so he showed me all the commercial certificate maneuvers, and we headed down to Jackson, Mississippi, and I paid my monies and got my certificate. So That's the reason why I don't have a private pilot certificate. Never had one. Okay, back to this article, or this story. Cirrus is kind of unique as far as an aircraft manufacturer, because they have something that comes as standard equipment on all their airplanes, as far as I understand. It's called CAPS, and that stands for the, where is it? Oh, come on, Jeff. I guess it's the Cirrus Airframe Parachute System. I think that's what the C stands for. The Cirrus Airframe Parachute System. I didn't write it down. Anyway, basically, in the event of an in-flight emergency, you can pull a red CAPS handle on the ceiling inside the cockpit, which deploys a solid fuel rocket out of a hatch that covers the concealed compartment where the parachute is stored. As the rocket carries the parachute rearward from the back of the airplane, the embedded CAPS airplane harness straps release from the fuselage. Within seconds, the 65-foot diameter canopy will unfurl, controlling the aircraft rate of descent. The final landing is absorbed by the specialized landing gear, roll cage, and Cirrus energy absorbing technology seats. And I think they're rated up to like 26 Gs or something. So with that in mind, okay, so I'm setting this up. This is a Cirrus airplane with this CAPS system, the airframe parachute system, and somewhere in Australia, let's see, an overconfident salesman intentionally put a Cirrus SR-22 into an aggravated stall before he lost control of the airplane and had to pull the parachute handle, according to the Australian Transport Safety Bureau report released this week. The salesman, who was also a flight instructor, told investigators he routinely flew a similar flight profile to demonstrate the aerodynamic and electronic safeguards built into the aircraft to prevent an out-of-control spin. On May 10th of this year, 2014, the aircraft beat all those systems and ended up in an unrecoverable spin. The chute deployed with about 2,000 feet to spare. The aircraft landed in a flat attitude in the back garden of a rural home, with a rattled salesman and two apparently less than impressed sales prospects able to walk away uninjured. The Cirrus POH clearly warns that the aircraft is not certified for spins, and the only approved recovery is pulling the chute. The salesman said he'd done the same sort of demo at least 30 and as many as 50 times in the previous 6 months, and thus may have been overconfident in a successful recovery. There's a picture in this article of what I believe is the homeowner and her garden and a Cirrus SR-22 planted in her garden, and the look on her face is priceless. She is just staring at the camera with a not very happy look on her face, with the aircraft in the background on top of her garden. The salesman had already flown with a left seat passenger the day before, and the ATSB said the prospect had expressed concerns about the stall spin characteristics of the aircraft. So after reaching about 6,000 feet, the salesman had the prospective buyer try a wings level stall from which he recovered normally. Then the salesman said, "Watch this." Oh, that's never a good thing when you hear a pilot say, "Watch this." He selected 50% flap, rolled the aircraft into a left turn at about 25 degrees angle of bank, reduced the power to idle, raised the nose of the aircraft. As the aircraft approached the stall, the salesman pointed to the vertical speed indicator. As he did this, the right wing dropped rapidly and the aircraft entered a spin to the right. The instructor said he tried his normal recovery routine, but the aircraft continued through 3 rotations before he said, "I'm sorry," pulled the chute. The salesman has since promised never to try those maneuvers again and to properly brief his passengers. Wow, I just thought that was kind of a funny story, but luckily the airplane did have the CAPS system, the Cirrus Airframe Parachute System, installed. Okay. Let's move on. Oh, what's a APG without a drone story? And this was interesting in that apparently the San Jose Police Department, hey, tying it in with my great meetup out there this last week on Monday in San Jose. Newly published documents show that the San Jose Police Department, which publicly acknowledged Tuesday that it should have done a better job of communicating its drone acquisition, does not believe that it even needs federal authorization in order to fly a drone. The Federal Aviation Administration thinks otherwise. Late last month, a set of documents showed that the SJPD acquired a hexacopter called the Century Neo 660, along with a GoPro video camera and live video transmitter. The nearly $7,000 January 2014 purchase was funded through a grant from the Bay Area Urban Area Security Initiative, a regional arm of the Department of Homeland Security, which I believe is a federal agency. San Jose, which proclaims itself the capital of Silicon Valley, is the third largest city in California. I didn't know that. And the 10th largest in the United States. Wow, I didn't know that either. Anyway, so the police department in San Jose is basically saying, "Hey, FAA, get out of here. You can't tell us whether or not we can do this or not." And the FAA is saying, "Excuse me, yes, we can." So there's a little bit of an argument and fight and legal battle over whether or not the UAV can be used by the San Jose Police Department. So we'll again keep our eyes open for updates on this story. Let's see here. Want to make sure I get all the news items that I wanted to talk about. This was sent in by a couple of you, and I don't remember who the other one was, but I know that Ahmed Danhamadu did from Nigeria, sent this to me. And this is from the Daily Caller. There's a hacker, I think it must be that time of year, for the annual Blackhat Cybersecurity Conference currently underway in Las Vegas. And of course, here's this dude that says that, let's see, the name of the guy is Consultant Ruben Santamarta, claims to have discovered how to hack into a passenger's airliner's avionics system, which would allow a potential cyber attacker to interfere with the satellite communications of a plane and disrupt crucial systems like navigation and safety. These devices are wide open, Santa Marta said in the report. The goal of his talk is to help change that situation. And the 32-year-old Santa Marta said that he was able to simulate infiltrating a plane's systems by hacking in through its Wi-Fi and other passenger services and reverse engineering the sensitive system's firmware. Okay, well, I don't think so, Mr. Santa Marta. I don't think that the Wi-Fi system has anything to do and has no connection whatsoever with the navigation systems on airplanes. So this is just one of those things that we hear every year. Oh, we're going to be able to do some kind of a device sitting back in 30 alpha and with our smartphone or iPad or whatever control the airplane. And I'm sorry, but that's just not the way it works. So, we'll probably hear more about this, the way that news is. Okay, and saw this as well. If you're interested, you, Mr. or Mrs. General Aviation Pilot, in having your own Wi-Fi system. Yeah, you're thinking, hey, all these major airlines have GoGo in-flight wireless internet service or another company's internet service available on the airplane. I want to be flying around in my Bonanza or whatever and have internet too. Well, you can by heading over to Bendix King by Honeywell. Their new product is called the AeroWave 100. And right now, for the first 25 customers, now through August 1st, oh, never mind, too late, the first 25 customers can receive 50 hours of free airtime, which is a $1,999 value. So basically, I think that the rate now, I think after you've actually purchased this piece of equipment and installed it, you can purchase or receive 50 hours of airtime for just a nice little low payment of $2,000. So, I guess if you really need that bandwidth, that online presence while you're flying your general aviation airplane, you can do it now. I hope you have a lot of money though. Bring your checkbook. All right, and finally, let's see. Why is that in my news? That must be some feedback that somebody sent me, so I'll know where to find it when I get to that point in the show. So, speaking of, how long have we been going now? For a while. Okay, let's get on with this.
Captain, incoming message.
Okay, this was sent to me by Bill Kempthorne quite some time ago, the 22nd of July. Sorry it's taken so long for me, Bill. But he sent this audio, and I believe it's been such a long time now since I've done it. I think I edited it to shorten it up a bit. But here, let's listen together of this audio clip.
John Arcana 1174, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Like to knock off the approach vector to the south, please.
1174, okay, turn right, heading 120, approach clearance is canceled. Advise as soon as you can and any kind of assistance you need.
Right, heading 120, and approach is canceled. We'll call you in a few minutes, Arcana 1174.
Roger.
On Arcana 1174, do you have a VFR approach available?
Arcana 1174, the weather is 3 miles in mist, broken 1,300 feet. If you can do a VFR approach, I'm not sure what you'd like for that. Thanks. Arcana 1178, I would approach clearance for you shortly. Travel company has got an issue, and I'm not sure what they're doing yet, so just give me a couple more minutes, and I'll give you the approach clearance.
Can we descend for Arcana 1178?
I'd rather not, just in case they turn back in front of you. They got an emergency. And Arcana 1178, you're cleared the LS approach runway 05.
Cleared the LS 05, Arcana 1178.
Sure.
We've got a fairly significant flight control problem right now, and we're just troubleshooting right now. Just keep us out over the lake south of the city for now at 3,000 feet. But I'm not sure we're going to maintain 3,000 very easy.
Okay, Arcana 1174 will do. For you're out over the lake now.
Arcana 1174, Roger, thank you.
Go ahead.
Take a vector downwind, please.
Arcana 1174, turn right. Can you make a right turn heading 270? You can have runway 5 or 33 left or right. It's your choice.
Okay, we'll set up for 5, and heading was 270?
Affirmative. Make it a 300 heading for Arcana 1174.
Okay, we're not quite ready for an approach yet. I just want to keep us close to the airport.
Arcana 1174, okay, make it a 240 heading. That'll keep you over the water for a while.
Thank you. 240 heading now for Arcana 1174. On 1174 again. We got 93 people on board. Currently, we've lost most of our flaps, and we've lost our autopilots, and we've lost standby.
Roger. 40, keep in closer.
Okay, right turn 040, and we'll do the one orbit here, and we should be able to come back around and land for Canada 1174.
Okay, thank you. Not 3 miles in mist, broken 1,300 feet, overcast 3,200 feet. Altimeter is 3007, 15 left or right is available, runway 05 also.
Okay, we'll take runway 5. We've got it all sorted out. We can take a 180-degree turn for a downwind to join base at this time.
Arcana 1174, turn left heading 250. This will be your downwind for runway 5, and when you get a chance, your fuel on board.
We check downwind now, heading 250, and currently we got 3,000 kilograms of fuel.
Thank you. As correction, Arcana 1174, you'll be entering an area of minimum IFR altitude of 2,800 feet.
Copy that at 1174, thank you.
Toronto, good day. It's Arcana 603, descending through 11.3, well, actually leveling 11,000, and we got Alpha.
Now 603, Rattle, good morning, runway 06 left, altimeter 3007. Just brief for runway 5 as well. We might switch you back. We've got an emergency in progress right now.
Okay, no worries for Arcana 603.
Thanks. Arcana 1174, when you're ready for your base, turn right heading 330.
We're ready at this time, heading 330, Arcana 1178.
Thank you. Arcana 1172, reduce your speed to 180 knots and fly heading of 130.
Okay, so 180 knots and heading a 130, Arcana 1172.
Thank you. We've got emergency in progress. I think we just need to get a little bit more space in front of you there.
Not a problem, Arcana 1172.
Okay, that's enough. They were successful in returning safely to Toronto. And, you know, I was looking, while I was listening to that recording, I was looking on the AV Herald database to see if I could find the incident. This was actually from info from the CADOR's, the Civil Aviation Daily Occurrence Reporting System, in which Alistair, another listener, advised me of, and I subscribe to now. And Bill apparently also subscribes to this daily occurrence reporting system in Canada. And he writes another example of when you need to hand fly an IFR approach. Yeah, so they lost their flaps and their autopilot systems, apparently something related to the hydraulic system. And so they were having to hand fly the airplane, which for you Airbus guys is pretty much an emergency procedure, right? No, I'm just kidding. And I thought that it was in the Aviation Herald. And on that same day, believe it or not, a different flight, Flight 146, a 321, not en route from Edmonton, but from Calgary to Toronto, I believe, also had a hydraulic malfunction. And so I thought that they were the same incident, but they were different incidents. So anyway, interesting to hear their communications with Tower and how they handled the emergency and kept their cool and were able to hand fly the airplane with its decreased capabilities to a successful landing at Toronto. So thank you, Bill, for sending that in, and good point. You need to know how to hand fly an airplane in case something like this happens. Okay, let's see. This is from Guilherme. He says, but you can call me William because I know it'll be hard to pronounce. I've been listening to your podcast for a few months now, and I must say you're now a part of my weekend. Hey, William. Guilherme? Guilherme? How am I doing? Probably butchering the heck out of it, aren't I? I'm a Portuguese student pilot very close to having my license. I won't take much time. I just would like you to know, although you have referred this several times, why would you favor your seniority on the Mad Dog over flying on the longest routes like Europe or South America? I get that you kind of get to pick your schedule more or less. Even so, wouldn't it be nice to get to know the world? Well, yes, it would. And I got to go all over the world, including a territory of Portugal, which I think is a Portuguese territory, the Azores. I visited lodges on one of the Azores Islands. When I was in the Air Force flying the C-141, and I got to go all over the world, and I was at the right age to do that. I was in my mid-20s. Yeah, I guess I was about early to mid-20s, actually. And so those were the days when I was much more physically fit, and I could sleep at the drop of a hat. If somebody told me that, hey, go and get your 8 hours of sleep, I'd go and get my 8 hours of sleep. No problem at all. And all those time zone changes and everything else hardly had any effect on me whatsoever. Now, fast forward 30 years later, I'm in my mid-50s, and I just don't think that going through all those time zone changes and everything else would be, you know, I might change my mind. You know, if you're listening to this show in let's say 2018, maybe Captain Jeff is now flying international routes, and he's very happy that he decided to do that. But for now, in 2014, based on my seniority and everything else and the types of trips that I'd be flying to Europe, I'd rather not right now. I'd like to go see the world, but I'd rather do it with you know, somebody I love, and you know, on my own time, not the airline's time. And a bunch of different reasons, as you know, mentioned, William, that I have for doing that. And seniority is just one of those things, but the time zone changes and all that other stuff, it's just, I don't know. Right now, I'd just prefer not to do it. Okay, and secondly, he continues, I would like to know what you think about my hometown in Madeira Island. It is known for being one of the most challenging airports in the world, especially when runway 5 is in use. I'll send you a link with a couple of landings, and if you have spare time, please take a look and to give some feedback. If you're ever in Lisbon, please do not hesitate in sending me an email. I would be delighted to buy you lunch or even a cup of coffee. Blue Skies and Tailwinds from Guilherme William Lewis. Well, thank you for sending the feedback from Madeira Island. And yeah, I've seen that YouTube video. It looks like when they're operating on runway 5, the winds are very, very challenging, and this video has a lot of folks trying to get in and not making it in, having to go around and multiple attempts and all that kind of stuff. So I'll have that in the show notes if you want to check it out yourself. So thank you, sir, for your feedback. Stephen writes, let's see, on July 24th, I caught your morning "Where is Captain Jeff" tweet from ATL that you were on your way to Buffalo. That's where I'm living. I was tracking your flight on FlightAware and was listening to live ATC. I thought it would be cool to hear your voice approaching Buffalo, but it was not you. If you're flying the plane, does your co-pilot use the radio? Anyway, while listening to the live ATC, the older approach controller seemed to talk slowly so you could understand him. He was very pleasant to other pilots, offering to take your pick of runways and allowing scenic flyovers over Niagara Falls. It seemed this controller really enjoyed his job, and my question is, why is it that some controllers talk so fast? Do you have trouble sometimes understanding some of them? So this is from Stephen, and he said, "Second, where is Captain Jeff tweet? I hope you enjoyed your morning, Joe." Yes, I did. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, when it's one pilot, the pilot flying it's his leg. The other pilot, the pilot monitoring, will talk on the radio. That's the standard way we do things. Now, things change when you have an abnormal or emergency situation where one person is working the abnormal procedure and communicating with everybody inside the airplane. And in that case, and it very rarely happens, but in that case, the pilot flying the airplane will actually be communicating on the radio as well with air traffic control. But in most cases, if it's my leg flying into Buffalo, Niagara, the voice that you hear on the radio will be my co-pilot. And if it's his leg, then it will be my voice. Again, there are some exceptions to that, but that's basically the way it works. And as far as controllers talking fast and talking slowly, usually I don't have trouble understanding them because I've been doing this for such a long time that you kind of know about, you kind of anticipate what they're going to say to you. So that really helps a lot, especially when you're flying to parts of the world where English is not their native language, and they have quite a thick accent. And if we didn't have some idea of what they were probably trying to communicate to us, we may not actually be able to understand what they were saying. So that's just something you get used to over the years. A lot of experience really helps. But there are times when somebody talks so fast that you just say, "Excuse me? Could you say that again? Please repeat." And it's always important for us to clarify instructions that are given to us or clearances that are given to us. And if there's ever a misunderstanding or you're not 100% sure that they told you to do something, even if you read it back, but you still have that kind of funny feeling in the back of your head thinking, I'm not completely comfortable with what we're doing here, so let's ask again. And that extra radio call costs nothing, and it could save you, your license or your certificate, or being off for a couple of weeks without pay, etc. So it's always good to make sure that you understand what is being communicated to you by air traffic control, and it's also important for them to understand what you're communicating to them. Okay, so yeah, there's an old story that talks about a good old boy flying up to New York, and New York Center is rattling off all these instructions, or maybe it's a New York approach control, and the guy is just rattling off these instructions extremely quickly, and the guy goes on and goes, "All right, tell you what, you're going to have to repeat that again." And then so the guy goes, "Well, let me tell you what, I'll tell you, we're going to be here all day because I'm going to keep asking you again what you're trying to tell me, and why don't you just slow it down so we don't have to, keep going over this over and over again," something like that. I'm not very good at telling jokes, but Apparently, there are times when a good old boy will get on the radio and really slow the pace of communications down quite a bit. And I guess in this case, the air traffic controller took the rate control knob on his personal talking system, lowered it a little bit, slowed down a little bit, so that this guy could understand the instruction. But, we kind of adapt, or I think most of us do. We talk in a normal rate to air traffic control, but sometimes when you get into these really, really busy environments, New York City, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Dallas, Fort Worth, Chicago, the controller sometimes doesn't hardly have time to take a breath. And then sometimes he'll give you an instruction and won't even wait for you to read it back because he has to give an instruction to somebody else. And in those cases, you kind of tend to know that when you read something back, you read it back very quickly and you only give the essential information that's required to be read back because you don't want to clog up the radio frequency. And then there are other times where you go somewhere and you can hear that hardly anything is going on the frequency, and you can, talk in a more moderate rate, or, in a regular kind of a conversation. So, that's about all I want to say about radio communications at this point. Thank you, Stephen. Let's see here. Ahmad, or Ahmad, I think that's the way you pronounce his name. First of all, let me do this first. I'm trying a new setup here. I'm actually using a new computer, a MacBook Pro, with the built-in camera for the YouTube video. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm using a brand spanking new machine. And now instead of using my iPad for the video, I'm using my iPad to play the music bumpers and stuff using a remote app. So anyway, I'm just playing around as I like to do. So Ahmad says, hello Jeff, my first question this time is for Learjet pilots, especially Lear 45 models. If you know any, do you know any? No, I don't know any Learjet 45 pilots. So Ahmad wants to know, I'd like to know if in real life Learjets have a scary behavior of pitching up, the nose pitching up during touchdown because of self-deploying spoilers, when armed, of course. They're situated way back near the trailing edge of the wings, which also happen to be situated way back just after the cabin. I'm asking because this always happens on FSX whenever I land the default Learjet 45. As soon as the main gear touches the runway, the spoilers pop up and it produces, I assume, the same effect of the elevators when they go up. The nose pitch rises and I have to apply forward pressure on the yoke to counter this unwanted rotation with extra forced derotation inputs so that the early weight on wheels, helps the brakes slow the Learjet down. Because of this, I formed the, quote, when flying Learjets habit of not arming the spoilers ahead of touchdown, and also ensured a compensatory habit of remembering to pull the spoiler handle back well after derotation. An answer to my question would also shed light on how well Microsoft's FSX team modeled the behavior of the default Learjet in the game. So, any of you out there who fly the Learjet 45 or know anything about this propensity of the airplane to pitch up when you touch down and the spoilers deploy, the auto spoilers, let me know, because Ahmad wants to know. He needs to know. And secondly, he says, if any research has been or is being done on manual brake cooling during quick turnarounds of heavy jets, 747, 767, 777, A330, A340, A380, something like ground crews spraying a fine mist of water or perhaps trimethyl ether or trimethyl ether onto those hot wheel brakes after parking? My uninformed assumption is that it could help to get the brakes ready/reliable for departure as early as 30 minutes or much earlier after pulling in from a landing or rejected takeoff. Am I letting my imagination run too far, or could I be onto something useful for brake management? If so, I think you should get a patent, and I'm a partner of yours. I don't know. That was me talking. I don't know. This is Ahmad again. I don't know how heated carbon brakes would behave when a jet or mist of coolant is sprayed onto them. Would they crack under the sudden uneven forced cooling? What if trimethyl ether is used in place of water? Thanks, and have a great one. I have no idea. I'm not a materials scientist or chemist or anything. I'm not even sure what trimethyl ether is. So any of you scientists or engineers out there, what do you think of Ahmed's idea of spraying something? My general, my first inkling would be that cooling too rapidly something like carbon or steel brakes might actually negatively affect the material to the point of ruining it or cracking it, as you surmise. So I'm not sure, Ahmed. Perhaps somebody out there will chime in on that one as well. So let's move on, shall we? Danish, or otherwise known as, what is he known as? Chocolate Danish, said he was reading his training manual, and on the first page it had this awesome note written by an 8-year-old on why they want to be a pilot. It gave me quite a good laugh. I think you'll enjoy it too. Number 1, I want to be a pilot when I grow up because it's fun and easy to do. 2, pilots don't need much school, they just have to learn numbers so they can read instruments. 3, I think they should be able to read maps so they can find their way if they get lost. 4, pilots should be brave so they won't get scared if it's foggy and they can't see, or if a wing or motor falls off, they should stay calm so they'll know what to do. That is a good point. Pilots have to have good eyes so they can see through the clouds. I wish I could see through the clouds. And they can't be afraid of lightning or thunder because they are closer to them than we are. Yeah, I can't say that I'm not afraid of that. Let's see. Pilots are always rich. They make more money than they can spend. This is because most people think airplane flying is dangerous, except pilots, because they don't, because they know how easy it is. Come on. I'd like to meet this kid. There isn't much I don't like, except girls. Like pilots and all the stewardesses want to marry them. Let's see, wait a minute. Am I reading this right? There isn't much I don't like, except girls. Oh, except girls like pilots, and all the stewardesses want to marry them, and they always have to chase them away so they won't bother them. Yeah, that's right. I'm always chasing away all those people wanting to marry me. And finally, I hope I don't get airsick, because if I do, I couldn't be a pilot and I would have to go to work. There actually is some truth in that one. So thank you, Danish, for sending that. Okay. I was wondering why you seem to fly only fly domestically. This seems to be a common theme out there. I personally want to fly internationally if I become an airline pilot, and are pilots able to choose which flights they want to work on? Well, maybe. You've mentioned a bidding system before, and I was wondering how that works. If you're ever in San Francisco, email me and we can grab a burger. Thanks, Elliot. Well, Elliot, I was just out in San Jose. I'm sorry. Head over to airlinepilotguy.com and sign up for that newsletter so that I'll know next time to contact you and let you know I'm in the Bay Area, and we can have a burger. Okay. If right now I decided to upgrade to an airplane, an international wide-body category, which I can, I'd go from the very, very top seniority group. I'm about 5% from the top on the Mad Dog in Atlanta, as far as the captains are concerned. I would go from 5% from the top to 85% from the top if I was flying a wide-body international category. So you can see I would be very, very close to the bottom of that category. So what does that mean? Well, it means that that airplane could fly to places that I would rather not fly. And in general, if I'm flying internationally, I would rather fly to Northern Hemisphere destinations like Europe, mostly Western Europe, and the UK, and Ireland and that kind of thing, or perhaps some of the Asian continents like Japan, etc. And that's it. But at 85% from the top or 15% from the bottom, guess what? I won't be able to pick and choose what I want to fly. In fact, I'd be flying all the cruddy trips that nobody else wants to fly. A lot of all-night flying both ways to the southern hemisphere, and going to places that have malaria problems and that kind of thing. And anyway, you kind of get the drift. I would be flying over the weekends. I'd be flying holidays. I wouldn't have any control over my schedule, and on and on and on. And I would rather wait until I had the seniority to fly something, that category with more seniority, so that I could pick to fly only to London or only to Rome or only to Paris or whatever, and not have to fly to the places I don't want to fly to. But when you're not a senior person in a particular category, you don't have a choice. You're going to go where they want you to go, whether you like it or not. So that's really the main reason. And of course the other reasons were that I mentioned earlier in the show, the time zones and all that stuff. So for now, I'm happy flying my little narrow body domestically. And just to be clear, I don't have a narrow body. The narrow body I'm referring to is the airplane. I'd like to have a narrow body, and I'd like to work on that. So maybe one of these days. Metabolism, when you get older, it just doesn't work as efficiently as it did when you were younger. Ray Williams, my neighbor up in Alpharetta, just a few doors up, says you were on episode 126 at 1:47:15 unsure of the term shouting in the message, shouting the bill for a customer. Shouting means buying something for someone else, in this case the customer's meal. Most typically, in my experience, it is for a round of drinks. He says, a hint, if you get into this situation, do your shout early. Otherwise, you may end up having more drinks than you want, since it is viewed as being kind of cruddy to refuse to shout after having partaken of other folks' shouts. Thanks for the podcast. I really enjoyed hearing the conversation with Dispatcher Mike. Very enlightening. Anytime you can beg, blackmail, or in other ways inveigle folk from other... I've never seen that word before. inveigle. Wow. Let me see if I can get a definition of it. Look up. Okay, it is pronounced inveigle. It's a verb. Persuade someone to do something by means of deception or flattery. Huh. Inveigle. Wow. You learn something new every day. Anytime you can beg, blackmail, or in other ways inveigle folk from other areas of Acme to participate, it would be totally okay by me. Aircraft scheduling would be neat. What happens when an aircraft becomes unserviceable, and how they work around it, especially if the airplane is at a distant airport, say Johannesburg or Tel Aviv. And maybe you should shout Dispatcher Mike a beer or 8 for his promotion. Very big grin. Ray Williams. Thank you. Yeah, I should probably. And one of these days, Ray, and all of those listening in the general Atlanta area, I do intend to do a Atlanta meetup sometime. I need to have somebody maybe that can organize something. Know what my schedule is and say, Jeff, we're going to meet at this place at this time on this day, and I'm going to handle inviting everybody and you to show up and have fun. So if anybody's interested in being the coordinator for something like that, give me a holler. So thank you, Ray, for your feedback, and I'll have to shout a beer or a round of drinks sometime while you're there. Nick writes, hope all is well with you. I have some questions regarding the FMC on the Mad Dog for you today. Number one, if standard instrument departure is renamed, will the old SID be in the FMC, or will it be updated with the new name? It will be updated. Number 2, how often is the SID or star renamed, if ever? Not that often. I'm just going to guess. On average, probably maybe once every year or two. They usually, what they'll do is if you consider like a new version of the SID, let's say coming into Atlanta from the Northeast, we fly the dirty arrival. And I don't know what the number is now. It's probably let's just say it's the dirty 1 arrival. Well, if they make some kind of a change, they change a frequency or they change whatever on the arrival procedure, they'll call it the dirty 2 on the next set of publication dates. And then if something changes again, they'll call it the dirty 3. Now, if they do like a major change or introduce a completely new arrival procedure, then they actually change the full name. So instead of the dirty arrival, like before the dirty arrival, it was the, what the heck was it? The Falcon arrival. So the Falcon became the dirty because they made a pretty significant change in the procedure. But little incremental changes, they just changed the number. So hope that makes sense to you. And then number 3, on the FMC under the approach departure button, do you select the SID star, then the runway you would be using, or is it a combination? LCH2/15 left, for example. The example I mentioned is the Lake Charles SID and runway 15 left at Houston Intercontinental. Well, in the airplane that I fly, the flight management computer interface that we use on the Mad Dog at Acme, so that's the only one I can vouch for because that's the one I use. When we are loading up the computer and we are putting in our arrival procedure, the first thing that we do, I don't know if you have to do it this way, but it's the best way to do it in my opinion, is first select the runway in which you think you'll be landing and flying the approach to, and then the approach transition, which may or may not be something you want to select depending on where you're going and how the transition interfaces with the arrival procedure. And then what that does, it basically limits or very significantly reduces the number of arrival procedures that show up on the left side so that you can see the arrival procedures that apply only to that runway. If you do it the other way around and you select the arrival procedure first, then it'll have a whole long list of runways. And not only that, but the arrival procedures that are listed on the left are going to be, every single version of that arrival procedure for every single runway. So you're going to have to go page down, page down, page down. I mean, it's going to take forever to find the arrival procedure that you're looking for that has the transition to the runway that you're looking for. So I think it's just better to, at least in my experience, find the runway that you think you're going to be using, and then the runway transition, and then you find the arrival procedure, and then the arrival transition fix. And that's the order that we do it at Acme on the Mad Dog. And then same thing with SIDS, the standard instrument departures. I select the runway first, then that greatly reduces the number of possibilities for departure procedures, and then I select the departure procedure, and then I select the departure transition off that departure. And for those of you out there who are not pilots or not flight simmers, I apologize. That was more than you probably wanted to hear about arrivals and departures. So let's move on. Finally, Nick says, when I fly the 737 new generation or next generation on Flight Simulator, I look up the flight route on FlightAware to see the SID and star to use in my flights. I notice, for example, I do not have the WARRR1, the WAR 1 star for Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson. Are there SID stars that are not programmed into the FMC that dispatch gave you? No. Our database on the airplanes that we fly always have the arrival procedures and departure procedures in that current version of the database. Very rarely will you be assigned one that you don't have in your database. And Acme is very good at making sure that we have all the appropriate arrival and departure procedures in the database for the airports that we operate into and out of So in this case, in the rare situation where that would happen, then I would request a new flight plan clearance to fly an arrival procedure that we actually have in our database. Because otherwise, what are you going to do? You don't have it. How are you going to fly it? All right, thanks, Nick, for your questions. Hi, Captain Jeff. This is William from KDOV, Dover. I just found this video of airliners dealing with crosswinds during takeoff and landing. This looks extreme, really extreme from my perspective. I know Acme has a 10 knots maximum tailwind component, but what about crosswind? Does the video depict extreme crosswinds, or is the perspective of the camera making these landings look more dramatic? Thanks as always, William. And he includes a link to the YouTube video, and we've talked about this video in the past. It was done by Snug, I believe, and it was filmed at, I think, the Birmingham airport in the UK, and it was a day when they had extremely strong crosswinds. So the crosswinds were pretty extreme that day, and the effect that you're talking about, I forgot what it's called, the proportional distortion or something like when you use a long lens, a long focal length lens, it has a way of compressing the perceived depth of field or depth of perception or whatever you want to call it. So it looks like on these videos the airplanes are coming in and they're hardly moving forward, and they look like they're almost moving like straight from up to straight down as they're battling these crosswinds. And so it does make it look much more dramatic. In fact, when you look at the runway, you can see the runway surface looks like it's just an undulating, it doesn't look like it's straight and flat at all, but it is. It's just that photographic distortion from that long focal length makes it look like the runway is just a rumply mess. So that does have something to do with it to make it look more dramatic. But on that day, apparently the crosswinds were very, very strong, and many airplanes were operating at their limits or maybe even beyond their crosswind limits. Now, a little information about your question about tailwind limitations, and all Acme airplanes do have a 10-knot maximum tailwind limitation, not a recommendation, but a limitation. And there are a couple exceptions to that. Some of the airports we operate into require maybe allow for a little extra amount of tailwind, because it's one of those situations where you land in a certain direction and take off in the opposite direction because of extremely high terrain at the end of the runway. Some of the islands in the Caribbean are like that. But in general, 10 knots is the maximum tailwind limit at Acme. Now, crosswinds at Acme are treated as limitations, but that's not true at all air carriers. When an airplane company like Airbus or Boeing certifies or certificates an airplane, they go out and they go into crosswind situations, and they fly in situations where the crosswinds are at a certain level or a certain value, and then basically whatever that value was that they demonstrated is the max demonstrated crosswind. It's not a limit. Again, it's just the maximum crosswind that the test pilots flew the airplane in. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it can't fly in a greater crosswind. It's just that it wasn't demonstrated to be able to do it. And so the airframe manufacturer basically saying, you're on your own if you want to try to land in something greater than what we demonstrated. So again, Acme takes that max demonstrated crosswind and turns it into a limit. So that's why sometimes when we go to places and the crosswind exceeds the max demonstrated crosswind for that airplane, we can't land. We must go somewhere else unless it's an emergency situation. So, hope that answered your question, William, about crosswinds. And looks like Nick is back again. He said, in episode 127, you talked about the fast-changing plans for the Mad Dog. So that made me wonder, have you thought about upgrading to some larger jet aircraft, such as the 7.3 or 7.5? Here we go with the upgrade stuff again. What are your plans when the Mad Dog is no longer in the fleet? Will you stay until it's gone? Just a bit curious, since you still have just under 10 years left, assuming that the FAA won't change the retirement age again. So, and this is Nick down in Noonan, Georgia, my southern neighbor, and no, I don't. I'm not going to move off this airplane for now because my seniority compared to what I have now on anything else is just not that good. And so when it comes to that time when Acme decides to get rid of the Mad Dog fleet, well, then I'm just going to have to take a look at what my choices are at that time. I have a feeling that things are going to start moving as far as people retiring, you know, the senior guys retiring, and the fleet makeup and everything else. I think everything is going to start really, really moving pretty rapidly in the next 2-3 years and beyond. And so I'm going to take a look at the situation at that time, see what kind of seniority that I have on various fleets, and then make my decision at that point. That's all I can say. You know, who knows, really? You know, I never even intended to fly the Mad Dog at all. I never flew it as a co-pilot. I never intended to be on this airplane as long as I have been. I thought I'll just fly it as long as necessary until I can bid off of it, and that was 12 years ago. So, needless to say, you know, you never know. Okay, this is from Daniel. He said, I imagine you will get this feedback from others, but I thought I'd share it with you since Atlanta is your home base. And many of you, and I know that I sent emails back to many of you saying, I'm not going to talk about this on the podcast. There was an incident where a person, a captain, operating out of Atlanta, basically said some things that in hindsight he probably wishes he hadn't on the radio frequency, and I don't know all the details of it, and I doubt it was justified, but it happened anyway. And I know that he wishes that this thing would go away. It is somebody that I know, so that's why I'm reluctant to say anything about it. But the incident I'm referring to was an airplane taxiing out for takeoff at Atlanta at ATL, and there was an exchange between that flight and the ground controller, and that's all I'm going to say about it. I don't know all the details. I don't know what the history is between this particular controller and this particular captain, who a lot of people are referring to as Captain Happy. Because I know him and I respect him as a friend, I'm not going to play the audio on the show, but you can find it. I'm sure many of you or most of you listening have already heard it. It was on the news and everything else. And again, I know for certain that this person is hoping that this will all go away and we'll focus our attention on something else. But just the only thing that I can take away from this, and all of you listening out there who do this for a living, well, even if you don't do it for a living, just remember that nowadays, almost everywhere you go, if you're operating an airplane, chances are your radio communications are being recorded. So just keep that in mind before you set out that little quip, or that I occasionally will do myself. And now I have to really think twice about keying in the microphone and saying something that I might regret later. Okay, so that's all I'll say about that. And the other thing that Daniel wrote, I also have a question for you about DCA. I live in D.C. and work in an office along the Georgetown waterfront, which is right along the river visual approach. In doing some research about why this approach is flown, I stumbled upon this old blog posting entitled, quote, "Why You Should Never Fly into Washington National Airport." And this is, from the Jethead blog, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Is the setup at DCA as dangerous as this pilot makes it out to be? Have you ever needed to divert to Dulles or BWI when flying into DCA? Excuse me, Daniel. No, I think that the guy that does this blog exaggerated a little bit. I don't think it's quite as dangerous as he makes it out to be. Do I think that this airport would be still used with all the restrictions on it if it weren't for the fact that it is our nation's capital and is it's in close proximity to all the offices of Congress and all the other high-level governmental institutions in our country? Do I think that we would still be operating out of that airport? Probably not. But if it were truly as dangerous as some people make it out to be, we wouldn't be operating there anyway, regardless of what Congress or anybody else thought. So it is challenging, I'll say that. I think it's more dangerous, the procedure that we do, leaving the Orange County John Wayne Airport in Southern California, doing that ridiculous noise abatement procedure. I think that is more dangerous. I'm not saying it is dangerous. It is more on the scale of safe and dangerous. It is more dangerous than what we do flying into and out of Washington, D.C. That's my opinion. So, but great question. Again, I'll have a link to that blog post in the show notes. And thank you for your comments, Daniel. And Nick again. Let's see. Long distance flying on the MD-8890. I recently flew San Jose, California to Honolulu, Hawaii on the 737-800. While on the ground at San Jose and Honolulu, I had the ground... I'm sure he's talking about the flight simulator FXX. While on the ground at San Jose and Honolulu, I had the ground power and air conditioning units, the GPU and ACU, in use, not for a busted APU, but for conserving fuel for the trip, as I was at a fuel critical for the trip. Just prior to pushback, I would start the APU for engine start while pushing back from the gate. Therefore, do you do this when you are fuel critical on the long flights you fly? If so, how often? Is this common throughout Acme, not just the Mad Dog? Thanks, Nick Carson from Noonan, Georgia. Well, Nick, no, that is standard operating procedure. We use ground power units and air conditioning units, external ones, on the ground for all of our flights year-round. And we don't start the APU until approximately 10 minutes before pushback time in order to save fuel. And we do that all the time. The only time that we start the APU earlier than that is especially this time of year when the ground conditioned air just can't keep up with the heat. And so in addition to having the ground cooling air, we also have to start up the APU and get the air conditioning packs running as well to keep the cabin cool. But if the cabin is kept within a reasonable comfort range, we do not start the auxiliary power unit, the APU, until approximately 10 minutes or so, maybe a little bit less than that, before our scheduled departure time in order to save fuel. The only other time that we would have the APU running is when we don't have external power or external conditioned air. And then we'd run it just to keep the passengers comfortable. So there you go. I hope that I didn't give the impression on answering that kind of question in the past that we never start our APU. No, we start it every flight right before we push. When we're pushing back from the gate, you know, you've probably flown into and out of Atlanta. We don't start the engines until we're getting close to that stopping point in our pushback, or sometime, you know, between leaving the gate and stopping for disconnect. That's when we start our engines, and we couldn't start our engines if we didn't have our auxiliary power unit running. So we use our auxiliary power unit if it's working every single flight, always when we're leaving, and a lot of the times when we're coming in. All right, let's see. This is from Ross in England. He says, I have 2 questions I wondered if you could help me with. Here's my first question. Most of us are familiar with people in other jobs being measured against targets and in many cases receiving incentivized pay. Is an airline pilot's performance measured, and are there incentives to hit targets? If so, how is the balance between safety and achieving targets struck? I would be interested in your opinion on whether you think any particular performance measurements that are not in use today might be helpful to introduce based on your experience. Okay, so this is one of those things, at least at my airline, Ross. It is Ross, yeah. That incentives are not used in general or specifically. For instance, if you can operate this flight, Captain Jeff, and save this amount of fuel, will give you a certain amount of money in addition to your normal pay for doing this trip in your paycheck. Or if you can do this flight in, it's blocked for this time, if you can get in 10 minutes earlier than that, we're going to give you some extra pay. And at Acme Airlines, they've never, well, as far as I know, they have never done it since I've been flying for Acme, because I think that you get close to crossing a line when you start dangling carrots or offering money for various things that could, if taken to an extreme, be a safety hazard. In other words, people really cutting it close, leaving the gate with fuel that may or may not be sufficient for the particular flight, etc. Trying to shave off time, and that's not always, by the way, the best thing to do. There are times when it's a bad thing for us to shave off 5 or 10 or 15 minutes from our flight, because guess what? We fly into a big hub, and we get there early, and the gate's not available because the efficiency using these gate spaces and parking spaces is very, very high, and if you get somewhere too early, then you have to sit there and wait, and I'm sure that many of you have experienced this, and that's frustrating. You've been flying for a couple hours, you arrive in Atlanta or Chicago or one of these big bases, and you have to sit there for 20 minutes waiting for the airplane that's occupying your gate to leave, and so that's not always a good thing. So I think that the people who make these kind of decisions have decided that performance-based measurements are something that we don't want to use, at least specifically speaking, for pilots in the operation of the flight. Now, the company as a whole does have certain performance benchmarks or goals that they strive for, and we do receive extra pay for, but it's not specific performance based on what we're doing, but company performance. In other words, if we get a certain on-time departure and arrival rate that is above a certain point consistently throughout a quarter, or throughout a month, I forgot what the reporting periods are, but Acme will actually give all the employees of the company a certain amount of money. Not a lot of money, but it's incentive pay. Yes, so to a lesser extent, incentive or performance pay is utilized for employees as a whole and the entire unified operation of our airline, but not specific tasks such as what I would have direct control of as far as operating the flight. Okay, second question is how airlines support their employees with layovers. What things do they take care of for you, and which things are left for you to take care of? I think you said in the past that transport is provided to and from the airport, yes, as well as hotel accommodation, yes. Is that always the case? Yes. And how are things like meals catered for? They give us a certain amount per hour, a subsistence rate in essence. So, and I think it's something domestically, I think it's something around $2 per hour. So if I fly a trip and I'm gone 48 hours from the time that I leave on my first flight and the time I come back, let's say that's a 48, so it's a 2-day trip, 48 hours. I get 48 times $2 an hour, so I get about 96, just under $100 for pay that is supposed to be used for eating expenses or tipping or whatever it is that I think it's generally regarded for use as paying for meal costs. And of course it just comes in our paycheck like everything else, and everybody basically treats it as part of their pay. So no, we do not put in expense statements for reimbursement of meal costs, etc. It's just an hourly rate that we get based on the number of hours we are away from base or away from home. Let's see, your next question. I can imagine on one hand the pleasure of getting to sample different regional cuisine as you travel around. However, the cost of eating in restaurants over the course of a month could get expensive, I guess, particularly if you're a more junior member of the crew. Yeah, and as I just said, the rate, the hourly rate, is for every crew member, regardless of how new or how old or what their seniority is or whatever. The only difference is that the rate for domestic trips is at one rate, and it's a higher rate for international travel. So everybody gets that same subsistence, or I forgot what the actual term is, crew meals or something like that. And it's not, they don't actually provide meals for us. They give us a certain amount of money that we can use on meals. And so yeah, it can get expensive, or you can be really, really cheap. You know, I know people that when they go out on a trip, they eat all their meals basically at fast food joints, or they bring their own meals with them, or they'll eat at a Subway or something like that. And then there are some people that go to places and they'll eat at a really nice restaurant and spend a lot of money on it. You know, it just depends on what you want to do, I guess. Let's see. P.S. You mentioned in my last feedback you thought I'd typoed by saying shout a round of drinks. Okay, here we go again. Apparently this is something that's outside of the United States, because I've never heard this. He says, I realize now this probably isn't something you would hear often in the U.S. I think it's an informal Australian phrase to mean I will buy a round of drinks. I'm English, so I must have picked it up from Australian friends over time. I'm sure an Australian listener could repeat it with a great accent. See the second paragraph of this wiki article, and it's a Wikipedia link to round of drinks. And then he's included a few pictures of himself with his lovely daughter Ella, and pulling silly faces to brighten up your day. These are wonderful. I'll put them in the show notes. I think that listeners would get a kick out of Ross and his cute little daughter Ella, and making faces. Very funny. Thank you, Ross, for your feedback. Let's see. This is from John. Hey there, Captain Jeff. I have a question about background checks for airlines. A few years ago, I had a suicide attempt and was observed by a hospital for a few hours, but I was not admitted. I'm doing much better since then and am halfway done with my private pilot license training. It's an absolute blast, by the way. I was wondering if this is going to show up on my record, and would airlines not hire me because of it? Thanks. John, I have no idea. Maybe somebody out there, and I do know that I have people out there listening that are in that particular, or they have knowledge of these kind of things, and whether or not something like this would be on a record and would be available for them to see. And in other words, they're involved with hiring practices and interview procedures and that kind of thing. So those of you listening who know something about this kind of thing, let me know. I have no idea. I have no idea, John. We'll have to wait for somebody more knowledgeable to answer your question. But I'm glad you're better now, and I'm glad that you're having a blast flying private, or doing your private pilot training. and thank you for your candor and being courageous enough to ask this question. Okay, I have to take a physiological break, so I will return shortly. Thank you. That was like my third cup of coffee, very small cups of coffee, and it finally caught up with me, and I had to take a quick break. So thank you for indulging me. Of course, if you're watching or listening to the podcast, it hardly took any time at all through the magic of podcasting. All right, let me get back to my show notes here. Let's see, Connor has a question or two or three. My name is Connor Hauk. I will be a senior in high school, and I'm planning on majoring in professional flight when I go to college. It has always been my dream to become an airline pilot and fly as a career. Me too. I was wondering if you could explain how pilots determine what aircraft they will fly when initially hired, and also the process of switching aircraft when they have seniority. Also, will the pilot shortage affect how quickly pilots upgrade to captain or move to bigger aircraft? Thank you so much, Connor. Well, good questions, Connor, and good luck with your piloting aspirations. Okay, so when you first get hired, it depends on the airline, and it depends on what the junior position happens to be at that moment in time at an airline. Presently at Acme, we're hiring quite a few pilots every month, and the way it's working right now is that wherever the need is greatest, that's where the pilots are going. So it might be right off the bat when you get hired by Acme, you could be a first officer in a 767 ER doing international kind of stuff, and a relief pilot work on those overseas routes. It might be the right seat of the Boeing 717. It might be the right seat of the Mad Dog. It could be any base. It just depends on where you're needed most and where your individual seniority evens out or ends up with your particular training class. And basically the first year, all your pay is going to be the same. You're in a probationary year at Acme the first year, so it really doesn't matter what airplane you're flying. After that first year, it will make a difference. The pay will be based on the airplane and what your longevity is and your position on that airplane. When I was hired at Acme almost 26 years ago now, wow, the junior airplane or the junior position was the second officer position, the flight engineer position on the 727. Every single one of us, that's what we did. There were times in the past around the time I was hired where some of the folks would go to the right seat of a DC-9 instead of the panel on the 727, but most, if not all, of all the classes during the late 80s were going right into the flight engineer position. So again, it just depends. It depends on the timing. It depends on the airline, and that's the best I can do with what you're going to start off doing at first. And let's see, second question, the process of switching aircraft. Every so often, periodically, an airline, at least at Acme, I can tell you what our procedure is. I'm not sure if it's true with other airlines, but we have periodically, depending on how things are moving, something we call advance entitlement. Advance entitlement is when the company says, hey, we have this many vacancies in these positions, or we have this many surpluses in these positions. So if you're in this category and we're going to have if we have a surplus and you're not very senior in it, you're probably going to be displaced, as I was when I was flying the 727 back shortly after 9/11 when we were retiring the 727 fleet. The second wave of displacements caught me, and that's when I was bumped or displaced to fly the Mad Dog as a captain. But it goes the other way as well. If I were to desire to fly another airplane, such as the 757, 767, 767ER, 777, whatever, the company would have an advance entitlement. They would broadcast that and say, the window is open now for this many vacancies, and you have until this date to put your bids in, just as we bid for vacation, just as we bid for our monthly schedules. You can bid for a change in your airplane, a change in your position, from co-pilot to captain, or a change in base, or a combination of any of those things. And if your seniority allows it, you will be awarded that position, and then they'll give you a date when you start your training and when you are converted to that new category, etc. So that's the way it works at Acme. And right in these times when things are starting to move a little bit more quickly and we're hiring people, these advance entitlements end up coming a lot more frequently than when things are stagnant. And you may not see an advance entitlement for a year or two or more. So that's how we make our changes. Let's see. Will the pilot shortage affect how quickly pilots upgrade to captain or move to bigger aircraft? Yes, it'll definitely make it happen faster. Thank you, Connor. Tim writes, he's from, where is he? Chattanooga Tim, Chattanooga, Tennessee. He says, I have an idea for the ultimate meetup, a day at Acme's new museum and booking the 737 sim for the day, ? I'm not sure about the 737 sim. Not sure. I think that would be kind of expensive. And I don't know anybody over there who has the keys to the simulator to open it up for an airline pilot guy meetup. I think that the company might frown on that a little bit. But meeting and checking out the new museum over there at ATL, that might be fun. It's a good idea, Tim. Keep that in mind. John sent me this. My wife Amy and I have been listening to your podcast on our BlackBerry Playbook for some time now and enjoyed immensely. Thanks, John. And Amy. And your cat, Mia. Meow. I came across a story today about a new anti-laser pointing technology for airplanes and thought you might find it interesting. Please see the link below for the article. Okay, so I'll include the link in the show notes. New ultra-thin film may protect pilots from laser beams. A University of Moncton, this is from CBC News, cbc.ca. University of Moncton physicist is hoping a new ultra-thin film that can be applied to the windshield of commercial airplanes may keep the skies safer by blocking laser beams that are being aimed at cockpits. Let's see, Pandurang Ashrit, physicist and the director of the Thin Films and Photonics Research Group at the University of Moncton, specializes in working with super thin materials. He said his latest project could keep airline pilots and their passengers safer in the future. So how does this work? The challenge is to create a film that blocks out the wavelengths of light that a laser would use while keeping the windshield clear. Let's see. There is a thin film that blocks the green laser. There is a slight odor to it because green light needs to be reflected. I'm sorry, not an odor. There is a slight color to it because the green light needs to be reflected. But at the same time, you can see that it is clear to the eyes so that pilots or whoever is using it can see through it. Interesting. I'm not sure how that would work or not, but that's an interesting article. If you want to read more about it, look at the link in the show notes for new ultra-thin film may protect pilots from laser beams. And thank you, John and Amy and Mia. Derek writes, thanks for the great podcast. Well, you're welcome, Derek. Let's see. I'm enclosing a link I found on FlightAware.com where Boeing expresses concern over the perception of the upcoming pilot shortage. It also delves into increased federal requirements for pilots entering the profession and even manual flying versus instrument flying or over-reliance. of course, these are recurring themes on the podcast, so I thought this article was a gold mine. And again, look for that link right down here in the show notes. Let's see, and he also adds, hopefully one day you will be flying the Atlanta to Harrisburg route with Acme, and we can explore local beer in the area. I'm always up for that. Thank you very much, Derek. And a little bit of the article here, Boeing on Tuesday forecast worldwide demand over the next 2 decades for 533,000 new commercial pilots and 584,000 maintenance technicians. And that's for the next 2 decades. In May, new low-cost carriers in Japan attributed a series of flight cancellations to a pilot shortage. And in the United States, a Government Accountability Office report in February found mixed evidence. So anyway, good article. Thank you very much for sending in. Of course, it quotes the president of the Airline Pilots Association, Captain Lee Moak. Here's the quote: "There is a shortage of pay and benefits for pilots in the regional airline industry, not a shortage of pilots who are capable and certified." And I think there might be a lot of truth to that. So, again, this is Derek's contribution. Thank you, sir. The article is from the SeattleTimes.com. Moving on. This is from Tim, who attended the Airline Pilot Guy meetup in San Jose. A standing-only section on planes could mean lower fares, study says. Oh, here we go again. The standing-only section, which is never going to happen. I guess a new university study says the idea of standing-only sections on planes is no joke. Well, if you ask me, it is a joke, because how are you going to restrain people in crashes if they're standing up? Then one of the studies says that it's like a board that you're strapped to. I don't know. An airline that removes seats can fit about 20% more passengers and, as a result, offer discounts of as much as 44%. Yeah, right. Compared with airlines that offer big, comfy seats. Remember, this is from a university. A bunch of people thinking, you know, theoretically and not practically. Let's see. The FAA officials say they haven't seen the study, but note that under current standards, passengers are required to fasten seatbelts during takeoffs and landings and when instructed by the pilot. And FAA spokesman Ian Gregor says you can't have a seatbelt without a seat. And to meet the seatbelt requirement, the study suggests passengers lean against a padded backboard with straps that cover over their shoulders. Oh my. I don't think so, but we'll see. Thank you, Tim, for the link to that article. Dan Colucci writes, "Hey Jeff, hoping you can answer this since you graduated from the Accident Investigation and Flight Safety School." I did, thank you. "I've heard that during a crash investigation, investigators can tell if a light bulb indicator was on, off, or burnt out at the time of a crash by looking at the filament. Can you elaborate this? Can you elaborate on this, and do you think LEDs now hamper this part of an investigation? Thank you for all of your hard work. Safe travels, Dan." Thank you, Dan Colucci. He puts a phonetic spelling of his last name. Thank you. That's very helpful. Yeah, we did talk about old-fashioned bulb technology. As far as the LEDs are concerned, I don't even think a light emitting diode, at least lamps, were even, I know they weren't in use back then. So I'm not sure how you would tell, or if you can tell, whether an LED is eliminated or not in a crash investigation. But for the older style or older lamps that are using the incandescent kind of bulbs, there are some guidelines that we had, and I'm trying to remember some of what we were looking for. If you have a new bulb, a normal lamp, the glass is clear. The filament is usually a small, tight, even, smooth, bright coil of tungsten wire clamped at each end into steel wire supports. A bulb may have two filaments, such as one for a high beam and one for a low beam, like in a car. The coils will be evenly spaced and the base should be bright. An aged lamp, or an older lamp, is darkened as the tungsten evaporates from the filament and weakens it. This is most conspicuous in large bulbs. The filament may sag with age and be pitted, but will likely still be bright. As the tungsten evaporates, the filament gets thinner and the concentrated current gets hotter at the weak spot, eventually burning out. That's how we get a failure of an incandescent bulb. In a collision, rapid acceleration or deceleration subjects the filament to violent inertial forces. The severity of impact and localized forces applied directly to the bulb are the most important of several factors in lamp mishap analysis. So if the bulb is hot, in other words, light is on, the filament will be stretched out of shape and will not return to its coil. It will appear as an irregular stretch as opposed to a uniform sag. In a hot shock, it is usually stretched more near its ends. In a cold shock, or in other words, if the crash happened and the bulb was off during the crash, if the glass does not break, there will be no effect on the filament unless the shock is severe. If it is severe, a break of the filament will be shown as a brittle break, not a plastic break, as when it's hot. The filament might even be broken loose within the bulb's glass container. The accuracy of lamp condition at the time of impact is based on the quickness on which a filament cools on the application or a power shutoff. Only a fraction of a second of power being on or off permits one to view the lamp as hot or cold. If the glass is broken or even cracked during a hot break, air will cause the filament to oxidize and disappear. So yeah, there are certain guidelines that crash investigators look at as far as determining when a light bulb is on or off. And I used some information that I gathered from the internet to answer that question because, you know, honestly, I didn't remember all the details regarding bulbs, whether they were off or on during a crash investigation. So I hope that was helpful and informative for you, Dan. Let's see, Zach writes, Zach from Indiana, I wanted to ask you about your type rating on the DC-9 series. Since you're checked out on that series, would you be eligible to fly the 717? No. At Acme Airlines, the Boeing 717 is a separate category, and regardless of the fact that my license or my card, my certificate says that I have a DC-9 type rating, I can't fly a DC-9 or a Boeing 717. I'm only checked out to fly the Mad Dog MD-88 and MD-90 at Acme Airlines. Let's see. Also, if you were given the chance to change to the 717, would you, and why? No, because I would be senior on that airplane too, but the pay rate on the 717 is lower than the pay rate on the airplane that I'm flying now, and the trips on the Boeing 717, in my opinion, are not as good as the trips that I'm flying now. You're going to fly more multiple flight days, multiple legs in one day, and I am all about flying as few number of legs as possible during a day. He says, on another note, I was browsing the internet and came across two funny airline skits. There was one on the Carol Burnett Show, and the other one was the UK group Monty Python. The first one's very funny, and I definitely recommend it to your viewers. And so he has the links to these two YouTube videos. And, of course, the first one is the Carol Burnett Show, as you mentioned, and Harvey Korman and Tim Conway getting onto an airplane, and they have a frills and a no frills section. Very, very cute. And then the second one is one that I really especially think is funny. John Cleese doing a skit, and John Cleese is the captain, and another guy is the co-pilot. I guess he's probably one of the Monty Python people, and I just don't recognize him. But I just took a little excerpt of this skit, and let me see which one is first. I think this one.
Hello? This is your captain speaking. There is absolutely no cause for alarm.
thinking, no, not yet. Let it sink in. They're thinking, what is there absolutely no cause for alarm about? Are the wings on fire?
The wings are not on fire.
Now they're thinking, why should he say that? So we say...
Oh, how are we doing? They've stopped eating, looking a bit worried.
Good.
And it goes on. They keep picking up the PA and making statements such as, your seat cushion can be used as a flotation device. Anyway, very, very cute skit. And so check it out in the show notes. All right. Thank you, Zach. Jorge writes, I was listening to the Airline Pilot Guy 128 this morning while I was walking to the office. Then you started talking about the refueling procedures and how some instructor told you how you should react when you got into the vortex, not trying to steer the other way. Anyway, all of this made me remember the accident of the Secretary of Interior here in Mexico in 2008. He was flying on a Learjet 45, executing the approach I talked to you about on episode 125 to Mexico City International Airport, ILS DME 5 right. They got sucked into the vortex produced by a Mexicana 767-300 arriving from Aziza. The little Lear was twisted and projected to the ground in a very dense office zone just about the time everybody was going out to their homes. It was a mess. So I realized if the guys flying that little Lear would have known what you knew, they may have been able to gain control of the aircraft and landed with just their shirts sweated. Do you think everyone should get this kind of tip or tips within the instruction to become pilots? Could this little piece of advice save lives? I think yes. Okay, so I think the issue of in-flight upsets and the recovery of an in-flight upset is something that is extremely important. It's first, number one, extremely important that we avoid any kind of a situation where we encounter an in-flight upset. And if we do, it is very important that we know what the heck to do. And I think that's one advantage that people who have military flight training and or those people who have aerobatic training, whether it be in the military or civilian world, when they experience airplanes in very unusual attitudes and know how to recover from them, I think they have a big advantage over those who have never had the opportunity to experience that kind of training. And I think, personally, that there were a couple different accidents that were blamed on, and again, it's just my opinion, but were blamed on rudder control problems on the 737, and that may have been a factor in these accidents and incidents. But I think that getting into an upset and not having had the experience of recovering from an unusual attitude contributed to, if not caused, the crashes. And I think it's very, very, very important that, number one, we avoid a situation where we get too close to a preceding airplane and we get into one of those situations where we're in an upset, and very, very important that we know what to do when that happens. And I know that we do this in the Part 121 airlines. We go into the simulator, even a full motion simulator, to experience unusual attitudes and how to recover from them. However, as good as these full motion simulators are in simulating normal flight conditions, they cannot simulate the loads, the G-forces, etc., the feeling that you're going to have in an airplane that is in a real unusual attitude. And you can't know exactly what it's going to feel like, how it does a number on your head until you're actually in an airplane with it happening. And that's why I always recommend that people take these special airplane upset courses. Like there was one down in Kissimmee, Florida. I forgot the outfit that does this. They use a couple different types of airplanes to do that kind of training. This kind of training is available out there. It's not cheap, but I think it's an important part of every pilot's toolbox. You know, having had that experience and knowing what to do when that happens. And of course, you know, in a situation when you're on approach and you get into a big airplane's wake, you know, recovery from these unusual attitudes requires that you have enough altitude below you to recover from it. In the case of this Learjet back in 2008, it may have been, even if the crew was executing the appropriate procedure to recover from the upset, they just may have not had enough altitude to do it. So it's a very sad thing. So that's why it's important we don't get too close to the airplanes ahead of us. And when we are getting closer, and the FAA is always trying to push us, get us tighter, tighter, closer, closer, if you're in visual conditions, to start thinking about that wake, even if you can't see it, know where it is, or envision where it is, and do something like offset upwind slightly if it's a possible thing to do. You know, into Atlanta, flying simultaneous triple approaches, you can't really deviate, especially if you're the one in the middle, from your course to the runway. But if you're on the northern one or the southern one, you may be able to possibly displace a little bit upwind to stay out of the wake as much as possible, or perhaps fly maybe half a dot higher on the glide slope so that you're above the wake. And so just some things to think about. So Jorge continues, just to tell you how hilarious the "I'm back" was. You just made me laugh so out loud that it seems I woke up everybody here in the office. Greetings from Mexico City. That was a separate piece of feedback that Jorge sent in. And so I'm glad I gave you a chuckle. Thanks again for your feedback, sir. And let's see, let's do some more audio feedback.
Hello, Captain Jeff. This is Jim Gowdy from Kalispell, Montana. I had a quick question for you about weight and balance. I know the FAA uses a standard weight of 190 pounds, and I think in the wintertime they increase that to 200 pounds. But that seems sort of light to me, because even my thin friends are way more than 190 pounds. Plus, doesn't account for the carry-on baggage that the passengers bring on. So I was sort of wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you calculate weight and balance. And you had mentioned that on one of your previous shows about the airway beacons. Montana still uses part of the airway beacon system. Matter of fact, the pilots out here are quite proud of that fact, and it's real interesting. You can see them light up there across the different mountain ranges on that. So if any of your pilots that are listening out there and are traveling out west here to Montana, and they want to fly the beacons, there's a good part of that system still in place, and they can fly the beacons. So clear skies and tailwinds, and I hope one of these days I can be on your Mad Dog there, and you can do a Bob Hoover on me and pour some tea just like he did. This is Jim Gowdy from Kalispell, Montana.
Jim Gowdy, I don't think you'll ever experience a Bob Hoover moment with me on any of my flights. Bob Hoover, an excellent pilot, was famous for, I think, taking his Aero Commander, I believe it was, and doing a barrel roll and pouring a glass of tea while performing the barrel roll. He was an amazing pilot. Rest in peace, Bob Hoover. And let's see, the beacons in Montana. Yeah, he has several links there. I'll include them in the show notes. Very fascinating. Montana still has a lot of the NDBs and ADFs or NDBs, the non-directional beacons, in use, and the lighted airway system, and that's why I had that in my news folder. So let me go back to that. Montana History Revealed Guiding Lights. This is one of the links that he sent. And it's talking about one of Montana's most unique treasures, the airway beacons, an integral part of Montana's night VFR navigational system, and they were installed back in the old Flying the Mail days. And so it's very, very interesting, this information about these. Basically, it's like lighthouses, but on the ground, not in the water. And these lights were used along a path. I guess initially, in the early days of Flying the Mail, they actually had farmers like setting bonfires in fields and that kind of thing to kind of mark the route for the airmail pilots to follow. And then they thought, you know what, it would be a nice idea to have these light beacons, and several of them still remain in Montana. It said, let's see, of the 39 Montana beacons, they determined that 19 could be decommissioned or moved. The remaining 20, however, were important to navigating the mountainous terrain of western Montana, so important that the state's Aeronautics Division advocated they stay in place. And they did until 1971, and then the FAA said we can't spend any more money on this. So the state of Montana took over for maintenance of these historic nighttime lighted airways. And now I think they maintain 17 of the beacons. 3 mark high terrain: Stony Point north of Helena, Moneta at the Idaho border, and Silver Bow near Butte. The other 14 mark the airways between Lookout Pass, Missoula, Helena, Great Falls, Bozeman, and Butte. And I'll bet you've seen them without realizing what they were. I guess this is addressed to a Montana audience. Look for the towers with their distinguishing orange and white paint and 2-foot dome lights. Each rotating beacon emits 2 million candle power flashing in regular sequences, and red course lights to guide planes through the steep terrain. Wow, that's pretty cool. So thank you for... Let me get back over here to my inbox and find your feedback. I have to scroll down here. Sorry for the interruption. Jim Gowdy for sending that feedback about Montana's beacons, both navigational, radio navigational and light navigation beacons. So again, I'll have all those great links in the show notes. Danish is back with us.
Hey, Captain Jeff, Chocolate Danish here. My wife said you're approved to call me Chocolate Danish. So
oh, good.
That's all cleared up. Feel good. Feel free to use that. Just wanted to thank you and Alistair for your guys' comments on the last episode. Much appreciated. Just wanted to give you some feedback on what Pilot Pip said on the last episode, and just wanted to say I couldn't agree with Pilot Pip more. It's, like all these schools like CTC and ATP, you're guaranteed to have your licenses, and sometimes they say, you're guaranteed to have an interview with the airlines. But you know what? Yeah, like you said, there's lots of pilots out there that went through that route, and, they're in debt and they haven't even had an interview with an airline. And I think what a lot of us young pilots need to realize is that, flight school and schools are still a business at the end of the day. They want your money. It doesn't matter how much passion you have. They still want your money. If you don't have money, then they're not going to want you to come to their school because it's a for-profit place. They're there to make a profit. And, that's something that I don't think a lot of people realize, and we need to realize that. And also, going into that much debt, especially when you're about to start an airline career, when you're not going to be making a ton of money at the start, I think that's got to take a toll on people. And I think we need to realize that, it'll be nice to be, in an airliner when we're young, and, so we just want to get a loans as much as we can and then to, get our licenses. But I think what we need to start doing is we need to start saving more and, working harder. My dad's always told me, if you have a passion for something, you gotta work for it. It's not going to be given to you. No airline's going to come up to you and say, hey, you have a lot of passion about flying, so here's money, go get all your licenses, and, we're going to hire you as soon as you're done. That doesn't happen. My dad wanted to own his own business. We moved here from Pakistan, and we lived the immigrant life. My dad worked 3 jobs, and it was tough. But he really wanted to have his own business, and here we are 10 years later, and he's owned 2 businesses already, and he sold them for quite good profit. And it's just about how much passion you have, how hard you want to work. If we really want to be an airline pilot, then we should be working our butt off to try to save money and do whatever is in our power to become airline pilots. And just the last thing I want to say, like Pilot Pip said, please do your research. Do not just go to a school because they say you're guaranteed a job or you're guaranteed an interview or anything like that, because you know what? Nothing is guaranteed in aviation, like you say, Captain Jeff. again, thank you very much for making the podcast. I really appreciate it, and God bless.
Well, thank you, Chocolate Danish. Now that I have approval from your wife to call you that, I appreciate your comments on what Pilot Pip had said. So keep listening and keep sending in feedback. This is from Massimo. This could be an interesting link, an argument for your podcast, and this is a link to thedailymail.com.uk. A glider pilot parachutes to safely after a mid-air collision. And it goes on to say, the amazing moment, a 70-year-old glider pilot had to bail out of his aircraft and parachute to safety after his wing fell off in a dramatic mid-air collision. And the two gliders crashed at 4,500 feet during a competition in Cambridgeshire. Andy Preston, 70, took drastic action after the wing of his glider came off. And so there are several high-resolution photographs of the two gliders right before the collision, and then a view of the 70-year-old glider pilot's glider with the wing coming off, and then another one, it's inverted, and he's basically falling out from the canopy, and then he pulls the parachute ripcord and lands safely in a field. And it says that the thing he was worried about most when he landed in the field, there was an operating combine, and he was afraid that the thing was going to run over him and kill him. It would have been ironic that he survived falling out of a glider whose wing had just sheared off and parachuted to safely, only to be killed by some farm equipment. So again, if you want to check out the article from the Daily Mail, look for it in the show notes. And thank you, Massimo, for the feedback. And Stan writes, Airbus 380 video, always enjoy your show and the information you provide about the airlines. I just watched this landing of an Airbus A380. That is one large plane. The views are amazing, but not certain if I like the way the pilot handles the plane. I guess you can call me old school. And then he gives me the link, and this is the link that we've seen and talked about in the past, the Lufthansa A380 coming into San Francisco, and I think it may have been the inaugural arrival of the airplane into SFO. And actually, I kind of was impressed by the way the captain was handling the plane. I'm not sure if you mean handling as in flying the plane, or handling how he interacted with crew members, or what. I'm not sure. Perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more about that. But I was impressed that with such a sophisticated automated airplane, that the captain of this A380 basically turned off the auto-flight system and the auto-throttle system and hand flew the darn airplane the last couple thousand feet down. And I was kind of surprised by that, actually, and pleased. Okay, here's another person that sent me, and I don't even know who it was, and that same article about the Boeing forecast for a huge need for pilots over the next 2 decades. So I'll skip that one. Fahim writes, I was doing the last episode, the Feedback Extra episode, using Google Hangouts on air, and Fahim was part of my live audience while I was recording the show, and he was in the chat room, and he sent me this feedback. He says, I know Arabic, Bengali, and English. What would that make it easier for me to become a pilot for Emirates? In other words, will it give me an advantage over other pilots? I'm currently 14 years old, and I live in Scotland. It's raining here. Surprise, surprise. Thanks in advance. Well, Fahim, I don't know. I'm not sure if that would give you an advantage. I would think that would give you some kind of an advantage, as long as everything else were equal amongst people interviewing for employment at Emirates Airlines. And I would think that knowing other languages besides English would be a good thing, or a positive thing. So, but again, I'm not involved in hiring. I don't know for sure, but that's my inkling that that would be a good thing. Michael from Tampa writes, I'm finally starting flying lessons. I'm training in Cessna 172 SP and 172P models at the Albert Whitted Airport, KSPG, in St. Petersburg, Florida. Do you have any tips for someone just starting out? And he says, please feel free to call, email, tweet, or Instagram message me if you're ever in Tampa so we can meet up. Okay, Michael, we'll have to do that sometime. And congratulations on starting your flight training in the Cessna 172. And the only tip I have is just, work hard, keep an open mind, have a great attitude, and enjoy every moment of your training as much as you can. There, how's that? Let's see. I'd mentioned on some previous episodes that, I don't know where I stand anymore regarding this push for the use of the driver's license in lieu of third-class medical reform. And Sport Pilot David writes, I've just listened to Airline Pilot Guy Flight 128, and in particular Evan's feedback on the driver's license. And then he lists some things about the EAA AOPA FAA petition for rulemaking, and then also the General Aviation Pilots Protection Act, GAPA, of 2014, now pending in Congress. And again, making some points in favor of doing something to streamline or make it more available for people to use a less restrictive medical examination to fly a specific category of airplanes like sport. What are they called? Sport craft? Let's see. Light sport airplanes. He said that as a sport pilot, there are only 3 LSA airplanes available to me for rental in the entire San Francisco Bay Area. By the way, Sport Pilot David, you probably didn't know I was in San Jose earlier this week, did you? Sorry. Again, sign up to the newsletter on the Airline Pilot Guy site so that you're on there and I can see that you are at SFO, SJC, and some of the other Bay Area airports, and then you too can be invited to one of these meetups if you so desire to join us. Okay. So anyway, one of these LSAs was down for maintenance, and as the one I usually fly did this weekend just when I wanted to use it, and so he was left without many options. So he's making the point that, well, he is for passage of reform, of the medical reform for using either less restrictive requirements for third-class medicals or using driver's licenses in lieu of third-class medicals. And I'm going to stay out of it. I'm going to take a step back. I'm not going to advocate either position. Okay? So he gives me some links for more resources on the matter, and he says I would urge the APG community to do some reading on this matter, and so he sends some links from the FAA, from AOPA, etc. So there you go, David. I'll let all of you guys hash this out from in the future, but I'll include those links in the show notes. Thank you, Sport Pilot Dave. Let's see. This is from
Jimmy Dean.
James Dean.
Yes, James Dean came back from the other side to answer a question for me. Sorry, Jim. I just love that song. I would like to answer the feedback question in regard to logging flight time in accordance with the Hobbs meter. I'm not yet a CFI or even a commercial pilot, so please take that into consideration while listening to my explanation. In most GA aircraft, you have 2 meters that will count hours differently for certain reasons. You have the Hobbs time, which is what most people use for logging flight time. Then there is the TAC time, also referred to MX time. It was clear to me early on that these two times did not always align and count over at the same rate during each flight lesson. Here is the reason why. MX time is linked to the engine's RPM. This time is more accurate while the RPM is higher, such as takeoff, cruise, or climb settings. At lower RPM, such as taxiing or idle settings, the meter is less accurate as it slows down as well. This difference can be 10 to 20% less than the recorded Hobbs time. MX time is documented in the aircraft engine logbooks, so certain inspections such as 100 hour is not necessarily 100 hours flown. For example, cross-country flight, you will take off and then enter cruise flight for an extended period of time. You will not idle the throttle until you are descending, or maybe you are using a cruise descent. In that case, you would not idle until you are in the pattern or abeam the numbers. This flight would cause your MX hours to be somewhat close to your flight time, as a majority of your flight, your engine is at a high RPM. Now, let's say you are flying circles in the pattern the next flight for the same duration of time as your previous cross-country flight. Since you are constantly idling the engine during your pattern work, at the end of the flight, the MX hours will be further off from your flight time. This is due to the difference in time of low versus high RPM settings during the flight, and is where that 10 to 20% average difference can change from flight to flight. As for the Hobbs meter, it is usually wired to the oil pressure indicating system. So if you're getting positive oil pressure, your Hobbs meter will be clicking over at a constant rate regardless of your engine RPM. In some aircraft, the Hobbs meter can be wired to the electrical system, which would start the time as soon as the master switch is turned on. This is not common in rental aircraft, however, as crafty pilots would simply or could simply fly without the master on and get away with free flight time, especially if they're not concerned with logging time in order to meet certain requirements. As far as matching the time with a personal watch, the Hobbs meter is usually accurate. Just remember that the Hobbs meter counts in tenths of an hour, so you have to convert that into a 60-minute hour while comparing the two times. I hope this helps out the APG member who was seeking an answer about logging his flight time. So, with that, Captain Jeff, I have a question for you. Is there a difference in flight time and MX time with the MD-88, MD-90? I know there are multiple ways to log your time as far as getting paid goes, but what about for the aircraft logbooks? Is there a sensor attached to the gear, similar to that of a weight-on-wheel switch used for other indications and systems operations? Let's see. Well, I'm not sure. I did ask a maintenance a mechanic on my last trip about this, and because everything is automated now using these ACAR systems of weight-on-wheel switches and everything else, so we have 4 basic times that we deal with on each flight. We have the out time, which is the time that's logged when the aircraft is backing out or pushing back from the gate. And that's usually tripped by the closing the front door, having the beacon, anti-collision beacon turned on, the parking brake released, or a combination of all those things, depending on the airplane and how the airplane is configured. But that basically the out time is when the airplane is backing out from the gate, essentially. The off time is when the weight on wheels switch triggers the airplane is airborne. So, the latter part of the takeoff roll, that's when that time is logged. The on time is when the airplane touches down and that same weight on wheel switch senses the airplane is on the ground. And that's the on time for on the ground. And then, of course, the in time is the time where the airplane blocks in, the parking brake is set, the front door opens, the anti-collision light is turned off, or some kind of combination of those, or whatever. So when we're talking about actual flying time, it's the off to on time, not the out to in time. So the off to on time is the actual time the airplane was flying, and I believe that's the time that is automatically logged, and that is the time that maintenance uses to determine flying time on the airplane. The other thing that's tracked is cycles, the pressurization cycles, and again, every flight is one cycle. So that is probably a more critical thing when it comes to doing inspections on airplanes and that kind of thing. Various maintenance procedures based on cycles more than the actual time on the airframe. Now the out to in time, backing out from the gate and blocking in when you first come in, when you arrive at the end of a flight, is the time that flight crews are most concerned with, because that is the time that we base our pay on. Not the actual liftoff and touchdown, but the actual blocking out to blocking in. So we are most concerned about the accuracy of that time. And so I hope that gives you an idea of how we keep track of time, at least at Acme and at least on the MD-88 and MD-90. Let's see. Finally, James goes on to say, also to answer your question about 10 episodes back, no, my wife does not mind that I listen to all of your podcasts. She is not into aviation all that much, only if it means she gets to ride along with me on a flight to the beach for some lunch. Thanks again, Captain Jeff, for the great podcast. And again, if you ever make it out to PDX, a beer will be on me. Excellent. I look forward to that sometime, James. Thanks again for your feedback. Now, several of you, or some of you, wrote with an explanation of track time. And let me see if I can find the other one. I think two of you sent me some feedback regarding that. Well, I'll just have to go with this one that I have pulled up right now, and this is from Ryan. G'day, Captain Jeff. The first thing I would like to discuss is track miles from episode 128. I've heard that term a few times when listening to ATC on my scanner. Usually something along the line of ABC 123, cancel, star, turn right heading 200 degrees, 15 track miles to final. I believe it is a term used by pilots or controllers to differentiate between miles to fly, including additional vectoring as opposed to miles to a point. I put my paint skills to use and made a diagram for a clearer explanation. Well, thank you, Ryan, for doing that. A very clear diagram. I would assume that the phrase track miles is to give pilots an indication of the expected vectoring distance, so the pilots don't think that they're getting a shortcut or start slowing down, prepping the aircraft for landing, and then end up getting a track elongation. Maybe it's just one of those terms that isn't used in the U.S. Yeah, honestly, I've never heard that term used in the United States, but apparently it's something common in other parts of the world. And the other person who sent me feedback about that also agrees with you, Ryan, that that's likely what they're talking about. And it'd be kind of cool if they use that here in the U.S. That's helpful information. Kind of gives us an idea of how long the circuit's going to be, how long it's going to be before you turn base and final. It helps you with your vertical planning. Let's see. The second thing is the feedback in episode 127 about pilots knowing controllers reminded me of an interesting exchange I heard a few months ago when I was listening to the Perth area ATC on my airband scanner. I've left out the actual airline involved and the real names, but it was something along the lines of this. ABC 123. So the flight says Melbourne Center, ABC 123, flight level 380. Melbourne Center answers, ABC 123, good morning, track direct to Julem. ABC 123, track direct Julem. A few seconds later, Melbourne Center says, is that you, Jeff? ABC 123, thought that voice sounded familiar. How you doing, John? Melbourne Center, good, thanks. We have to meet up while you're here. Sure thing, give me a call on my number. And then he gives the number, and then will do, call you later. Anyway, enough rambling, back to the show, Ryan. Okay, so yeah, you do hear exchanges like that sometimes, usually involving approach control in Atlanta. A lot of the pilots that work for Acme and other airlines based in Atlanta live on the south side of town, and that's also where the Atlanta Tracon facility is located, and also Atlanta Center is on the south side of town. So a lot of the pilots that are flying for airlines based in Atlanta are neighbors with people working air traffic control, either in Tracon or in Center. And so, guess what? Personal relationships actually occur. And sometimes when you're talking on the radio, we go, hey, was that you? Yeah, I hear that occasionally. So you hear some personal stuff. It's always interesting. Alrighty, thank you, Ryan, for the explanation of track miles. Let's see, Max writes, this is my very first feedback for you. Unfortunately, it ended up longer than I expected. So if you think it's too long, you know what? Let me put this one aside, Max. He just sent this to me a few days ago. Because I'm getting close to wrapping up the show here. And I didn't do any editing on your file. So I'm going to put that off to the side, and we'll talk about your feedback on the next episode, episode 130. And I see I'm getting down to the point where I haven't fully prepared these. I guess I figured I wasn't going to get this far. And let me read this one here. It's not an audio feedback. It's just email feedback from Fahim in Scotland. He's 14 years old, and this is his first time submitting some feedback, so I hope my ignorance of the more advanced aviation knowledge doesn't peek through too much. We're all the same here, Fahim. I interacted briefly via the live chat previously, so I hope you remember me. Yeah, I remember you. So to start off, I want to piggyback off of Danisha's question about jump seating. I was simply curious as to why another pilot would want to, so to speak, hitchhike on another flight. It also reminds me of carpooling, except with 200 plus people. Well, the reason why we want to jump seat is that we want to get to work. And that's generally the number one reason why pilots jump seat on either their own airline or other airlines. And sometimes I jump seat because the flight is so full that I can't really use my non-revenue standby pass privileges, because I think that maybe my seniority is not going to be good enough to get on the flight, or perhaps there aren't even any empty seats available. But guess what? There might be 1 or 2 jump seats available in the cockpit, so that might be the only way that I can get out to, let's say, Los Angeles to visit my family. So there are many, many reasons, but mostly it's for those pilots and flight attendants who are commuting to or commuting back home from their trip. So it's a great privilege to have. Also, I was wondering what perks you get from Acme, financially or non-financially. Well, you know, we have, you know, the standard perks that people get. I think the number one perk that people flying for people working for airlines receive is the ability to travel using standby travel privileges, or what we call non-revenue travel. And it's getting harder and harder to use that privilege because our flights are more full and more full. But there are still times when you can travel for free places where, you know, if you didn't have that privilege, you'd have to pay for it. So it's a big money savings privilege. It's a nice privilege to have. I'd say that's the number one privilege you have for working for an airline like Acme. And he continues, I have been a keen, aspiring commercial pilot since I was 6, and I hope to begin training in 2016 when I'm 16, and I can participate in the medical test for my PPL. I've been listening to APG since episode 100 or so. Wow. And I am loving it. There is one small, minor problem with it, though. I have to wait 6 to 7 days for the next episode. Sorry, Fahim. I can only do so much. So thank you for your feedback again. I do appreciate it. And let's see. Do I have time to squeeze out one more? Let me do this one, because I think it might be time sensitive a little bit. This is from Mike Rogers at the Northwest Missouri State University in Missouri. He says this really isn't feedback, but he's trying to drum up support for their fly-in in Maryville, Missouri on the 14th of September. And he sent me the flyer for that. I love the pun. A flyer for the fly-in. And I'll post that in the show notes. The Maryville fly-in, hot breakfast, cool aircraft, fabulous flights at the Northwest Missouri Regional Airport, 1 mile west of Maryville, Missouri on Highway 46. Again, that's Sunday, September 14th, 2014. And I think one of the main reasons why you might want to go is a delicious all-you-can-eat breakfast from 7 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., only $6 per person. And if you fly in your own airplane, you eat for free. Yes. So the proceeds from this fly-in go to aviation education, the EAA Young Eagles, and future fly-in events. And there's a contact for more information. And again, this is the Maryville, Missouri fly-in, hosted by the Hawk Road Flyers EAA Chapter 1540 on Sunday, September 14th, 2014, in the lovely Maryville, Missouri on Highway 46. Get your tickets. All right. That's going to be enough. I'm going to shut her down. And again, I didn't get all of your feedback, but I got several of your questions and comments in on the show. As always, if you want to learn more about the show, head over to airlinepilotguy.com / just airlinepilotguy.com. And there you can find out other ways to listen to the show or watch the show if you desire. Ways you can send feedback. You can learn about the coffee fund there as well. And yeah, that's it. So until next time, episode 130, episode 129's flight is blocking in and is just about over. So I hope you enjoyed it. I do enjoy talking and answering your questions. And until next time, wishing you clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds. Kavu to you. Take care, and God bless.
Good day.